right, we're gonna
There's
get
a couple of
started.
that are suing this district for above the masks.
So I went to last year for half of the year, and a group of students wanted to, because most schools there got rid of it. A couple of students.
Good evening, welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7:01. And I'd like to begin by inviting you to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, next on our agenda, we're going to take citizens' comments. Well, before we get started, I guess I should mention, this meeting is being recorded, and this meeting is also being streamed live on HWCam on YouTube. We will be taking citizens' comments, if any, both here in person as well as on the Zoom link. If anyone is on the Zoom link and you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise your hand feature. Before we take citizens' comments, I ask citizens to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And as always, we genuinely appreciate anything that you have to say, and we will be here to listen. I'm just going to check in. Do we have a sound issue back there? Good. Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Tracy, do we have people on Zoom?
As of right now, no.
Okay. All right, maybe we'll ask the room. All right, do we have any citizens who want to make a comment? Oh, okay, we've got
Me.
we've got a microphone issue. We're going to take a moment. Okay, thank you. All right, and do we have any citizens on Zoom that would like to make a comment?
We have none.
Okay, looks like we have no one currently on Zoom that wants to comment. If there is anyone watching on Zoom, please know that we will close the Zoom link. It's only available for the public comment, but as I just mentioned, you can continue to watch on HWCam on YouTube. Okay.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question about the agenda?
I'm sorry, what was that, Michelle?
Can I ask a question about the agenda?
Absolutely.
So in the past, when we've had this recognition of professional status, we've had a reception ahead of time, and I can understand why we wouldn't do that, but do we have people here that are being recognized that we could put that higher on the agenda?
We do not.
No, I'll let you answer that, Mr. Tracy.
Yeah. We do not have anybody here this evening.
Okay.
We had more nays than yays, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, next on the agenda, as we have been doing at each meeting, we're going to review some of the school committee protocols, and Julia has agreed to read for us this evening.
As elected members of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee, we, including the superintendent, accept the high honor and trust that has been placed in us to ensure that the students of the district receive the best education possible. To that end, we hereby commit to the following in the conduct of our business. If an individual school committee member receives an email relevant to overall district policy or operations, they will forward it to the full school committee and the superintendent. School committee members will attend meetings on time and be well prepared to discuss agenda items. While at meetings, members will stay focused on the agenda items and will not engage in communication outside of the agenda being discussed. When making decisions, school committee members will keep an open mind, utilizing the best information available, including research, best practices, public input, and financial considerations. Members will debate issues and not each other. Members will analyze carefully and debate fully whenever necessary prior to making decisions.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you to everyone. It's been a really helpful way to keep our focus on those protocols, to have people read them, and I appreciate people being willing to do that. Next up, I'm going to ask Superintendent Tracy to introduce our student representative.
Thank you very much. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing our current student body president at the high school, Mr. Christopher Damaraki. He'll be joining us at school committees from this point on and giving a monthly report, one time a month, one of the 2 meetings. He will share student experiences at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, just as we did last year. Chris is an interesting guy. He's a 3-sport athlete, a talented, very talented singer, district finalist for DECA, well respected and well liked by teachers and students both at the high school. I know as a former principal at high school, Chris was a go-to guy when you needed to know something or you needed to learn something about what may or may not be going on. He warmly and confidently welcomed our teachers back to the school year this year at the staff orientation at the high school. Did a great job with a very concise but well-crafted speech. And he's also helped mentor all of our incoming freshmen this year, and that's a big deal for us to really have a guy like Chris out there as the person to look towards as our incoming freshmen are coming in and learning about the high school and learning about, all of the things that are available to them. It's great to have an ambassador like Chris and all of our other mentors for kids to go to and ask questions when they're confused, or to see in the hallways to say, hey, what do I do here, or where is this? And Chris has been really kind of a go-to guy at the high school. So I'd like to welcome Chris, and he will be joining us from this point on at our meetings.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Welcome. We're really happy to have you here, and it's really nice to be able to have you here in person this year. So thank you. Yeah. And we look forward to hearing from you when you're ready with your first report.
Next meeting.
Next week. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, next up is the consent agenda. Jen, do you have a motion?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as written.
So can we ask if anything's going to be held before we make the motion?
Thank you. Thank you for that, Michelle. So we haven't had a second, so before we make the motion, I will ask, does anyone have any items from the consent agenda that they would like held?
I'd like to hold the donation.
Okay, so we will hold B, the donations for the high school robotics program will be held. Okay, thank you. Can we try one more time, Jen?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as written, except for the donations to the high school robotics program.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Anna. And all those in favor? And that is 5 in favor, and that is unanimous of the members present. And the motion passes. Michelle, you held the donations. Can you, what would you like to address?
Just would like us to recognize that there is being a large donation made by an individual, Jackie Stanwood, to the robotics, and that we should thank them. It looks like it's going to help them cover costs for entry into a tournament. So,
thank you very much. I'm pleased to have that acknowledged. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say? Looks like we're ready for a motion. Can we have a motion on the donations?
I move that we accept the donations to the high school robotics program.
Second.
Second by Julia Campbell. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? And that is 5 in favor, and the motion passes. It's unanimous of the members present. Okay, next up on the agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and I think you're going to introduce our presenters for the school improvement plan. Is that right?
I will. This is a fantastic opportunity for our administrators, our school principals, to share the plans that they've put together along with their, teachers and school councils. Please keep in mind this evening, these school improvement plans are very aligned with our school district goals, which we have right here. The district goals are an extremely heavy lift, and I think it's important to recognize that the district goals really get carried by the schools, and the work that gets done is generally done at the schools and led by our principals this evening. They'll give you an overview of their goals and some of the things that they will do as action steps towards those goals, and certainly we'll take questions after. So I think the elementary crew is going to start us out this evening. Mr. Schurston will begin.
All right, so as we get started and think about these goals, really what we tried to do is focus on the district goals that we talked about in the spring. There is a lot there, and we had those conversations in the spring.
Ben, can I ask you to speak a little
sorry.
closer to the microphone?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Am I good? Okay. Thinking about the district improvement goals that we identified in the spring, that there were a lot of things there, and part of that conversation was coming around like, there's a lot here, can we do all of this, but is there anything in here that we can wait on?
I knew that biology.
Right?
Exactly.
Are we better?
Yeah.
All right. Let's, save my lower back here. Thank you. So thinking about those big things that we were talking about in the spring, and we came to sort of the conclusion that there wasn't anything that we could leave off, right? Everything was so important that we couldn't put it off a year, even though it meant putting a lot on our plate. So thinking about our elementary goals, we're really trying to articulate what does that really look like at the elementary level, so that we're not adding more and really spreading ourselves too thin to not be able to put a good effort into those larger district goals. All right, so our first goal. So our first goal is to improve district reading outcomes at the elementary level by designing and implementing a comprehensive professional development plan. So this began this summer, working with our new professional development committee. We had some summer work around this, and they'll continue to review this throughout the year. One of our big action steps will be professional development for our literacy TAs in the science of reading. This allows them to be up to date. It allows us to create some shared resources. It allows us to have some consistency. That word consistency is something I'm going to say a lot in the next few minutes, so get ready for that. And it allows for some more common assessments and training around those common assessments between the buildings. Another big action step is going to be professional development for teachers in the science of reading and the urgency of that change. So looking at why are we doing this? Why does this have to happen right now? Again, building some more of that consistency, and also looking at some of the assessments that we'll be using. How do we use them? How do we pull data from them to inform instruction and to inform intervention? Our last big action step for this goal is to develop practical classroom strategies based on the science of reading. So starting out with that critical question around why are we doing this, and then moving into the what. What are we going to do? What does this look like in the classroom? Having some of that, again, more of that consistency between classrooms across all three schools, and really focusing on those foundational standards of reading, so that as kids move through the elementary curriculum, we have those foundations really shored up as they move up into the upper grades. All right, so our second goal is to design and implement a cohesive multi-tiered system of support, or an MTSS, targeting the acquisition of needed reading skills. So this dates back actually pre-pandemic. We had a group of elementary educators across all three buildings, across grade levels K through 3, looking at 4 or 5 years of historical reading data. We had a couple of meetings. We had giant spreadsheets taped up on the wall, and then the world shut down, and then all got put on hold. And so we're really excited to be able to pick that back up again. We had an MTSS and literacy group going this summer to begin to be able to get that going again. One of our big first action steps is going to be assess and document our current state of all of our existing K-5 reading curriculum and resources. One of the things that we know right now is that our current state is not consistent, and that's one of the things that we have to get back to. We know we have pockets of greatness throughout the district, and that is really helping our kids, but trying to get beyond those pockets of greatness to having a system that really supports everybody. We're looking to develop essential agreements for our K-5 literacy blocks. This is around looking at what we're doing right now. Again, those pockets of greatness. What do we need to be doing? And let's agree on what those reading blocks are going to look like. And finally, sharing that plan out, getting everybody on the same page. What are we doing now? How do we support those struggling readers? And again, that consistency piece that I keep coming back to. That consistency piece is important, but what we're really trying to do is build a structure here that can be responsive to individual students' needs. So rather than having those pockets of greatness that are supporting our kids, having systems in place to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks and everybody can be successful.
Carolyn Shadiak, our Winthrop Elementary School principal.
I need to lower the microphone. So elementary goal number 3, elementary staff will increase awareness and support our diverse community, is aligned directly to improvement goal 3, district improvement goal 3, commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI practices. Through this goal, we're working to ensure that all students, staff, and families feel a sense of belonging in our school communities as we increase our awareness and support for our diverse community members. The important work towards this goal has already begun. This summer, the district offered a number of book groups to staff, which included titles focused on DEI and belonging, which is now kind of our catch-all word. Some staff read the book Stamped, Quiet, and the Power of Neurodiversity as just a few examples. At the beginning of the school year, teachers received training on identifying the 7 most common forms of bias and stereotypes in curriculum and what the process would be to follow for reporting and responding to that bias when it is encountered in classroom materials through a balanced conversation, as well as reporting it to the elementary director of teaching and learning so that we can address those curriculum materials. The DEI committee has been established and has been working with Regis Shields from Equity Journey Partners to prepare the district for the DEI audit, as well as ongoing professional development to build our collective understanding of DEI competencies. And just as an additional note, the staff at all 3 elementary schools yesterday focused on relationship mapping to ensure that all students feel connected to adults in the school, to support a sense of belonging, and to make sure that we are supporting all students regardless of what their needs might be.
Want to do questions by level?
Yeah, we can, you want to pause for questions?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We don't have, okay, yeah. So let's, those are the elementary goals. So let's start with questions, clarifying questions anyone had. Jen?
How are we going to address any DEI deficiencies when they're found?
So that's part of the DEI audit, and they will be, that's part of the DEI audit process, and as the DEI audit happens, we'll be given some directives about how we're going to respond to those.
Can I add to that?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, please do.
There are community discussions that will occur as a result of this audit. I mean, that definitely will involve all of us, members of the community, members of the school district. And I think it's important to kind of keep an open mindset as we go through this audit process in the next few months to be able to kind of take that all in and then build kind of responses together. I think it's really important to include as many groups as possible as we build those responses. So it won't specifically be just school level responses. I think what we'll find in this audit is that we'll have kind of broader scope issues that we'll need to deal with that may not be directly related to school. Could be related to items outside of school as well. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Julia?
have a question. Could we see the research on the 7 identified biases? I'm just interested personally. I don't know if that was a report that came out
So-
that's public.
There were a couple of resources that were shared with us in our initial training and looking at curriculum and bias in the curriculum. And I did not copy the links. One of them
Oh,
came.
no, it's okay.
Yep.
But is that something we can get
Yes,
access
it's something
to?
that's, yep, it's all available. And there was one resource from Wellesley, and a second resource from Boston Public Schools. So those were two of the resources that we used as a reference point, and that those resources have been shared with teachers, and we reviewed the 7 most common bias that we see in curriculum, which I can tell you what they are if you want to know.
Oh, no, it's, you don't
Okay.
have to read them
Oh,
off. I just wondered if
perfect.
it was.
Perfect.
Oh,
Okay.
Thanks, Eric.
I was just, for my own personal
Yeah.
edification, I was interested.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. Those were the 2 resources we chose.
Also, Eric, is this something being done, we might be learning later, is this something being done in the middle school and the high school too?
So this was done through the entire school system.
Okay.
We had in a response to the Department of Education complaint that we received last year, this was part of that response. We did a training at the beginning, on the second day, and in a couple buildings the third day, depending on when they had time, that was connected to bias and understanding bias, identifying bias, and then how to report it. So we have not only presented, we have a full presentation we use with this Wellesley study. The Wellesley study is really what most schools have kind of relied on as a, these are the 7 things to look for within a curriculum, or within something a teacher might be bringing in from the outside in relation or in balance to something that they may be teaching. So all of the staff was trained with the same presentation, given the same materials. So this is a sheet, one of the sheets that was handed out. And then they also now have a form that they can use to report when they feel like, okay, I think this may be biased, or I know this may be biased, and here's why. And that will go to the curriculum leaders at the secondary level and to Jennifer Clifford, Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning. She'll get the ones from the elementary level. So.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Other clarifying questions? Anna?
This is actually a really helpful follow-up from that complaint, and just to know that it's sort of separate from the DEI work, but there was something really specific that we were responding to. I think my question is the Equity Journey Partners, so they're providing some coaching, but they are also the firm that's been contracted to do the audit itself, is that right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Like-
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't finalized the contract with them, but they've met the RFP, the request that we sent out. We're just kind of going back and forth right now to finalize the details of the contract. That includes not only the professional development, but also the equity audit, the scope of the equity audit.
So they're sort of doing everything, all
Yeah.
together for us.
And it's pretty comprehensive, and in fact, I'll give you a little more detail later this evening when I give the gold follow-up.
Okay. My other question is, have you, at the building level, had any pushback from anyone, either parents or teachers, or has anybody complained about this?
Nope.
No.
As a matter of fact, some people are excited to see this happening.
Michelle?
So one of the things that was brought up a lot during the budget process is that we were going to have all of these untrained literacy TAs helping with our struggling learners, and I see that we have professional development here. Could you describe a little bit about what that professional development was?
Here she is.
Thank
Hi.
They
you.
are no longer untrained.
So this year I am acting as the interim principal at Cutler 2 days a week, but I am also working as the district literacy intervention specialist. So I have been providing a lot of the training to the teaching assistants. So in the first 2 weeks of school, we worked together. We've done all kinds of training on the research about the science of reading, the research that's been pretty clear for decades, really, and still just hasn't quite made it into schools in the way that we hope it will in the coming years. A lot of the teaching assistants took the landmark course this summer around the science of reading, and that was a great way to start us off with a common understanding. We are creating common resources and materials to be used across the three schools. Annie Drews and I, who is currently on maternity leave, created a lesson plan format. We are meeting regularly with TAs. The trainings continue. We've trained them in the assessments, analyzing the assessments. They've been working to make groupings. So it's really an ongoing training that will continue through the year and beyond.
And would you say there's been any bumps in the road, or would you say it's been going well and been well received?
Actually, I'm incredibly impressed with the teaching assistants and the level of responsibility they're taking on, feeling this confidence with the knowledge that they've gained and the understanding of the practices we're putting into place. So I think it's really going well. We are still in the process of the assessing piece and helping teachers who are doing their own assessments this year. The teaching assistants have been supporting in the classrooms to allow the teachers the ability to complete the common assessments themselves, to also be learning to analyze the data. So I feel like it's really going well. We'll be starting really regular interventions in the coming week or two. So I think it's going well.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Can I add something up real quick?
Look, Ben, go ahead.
Just an additional piece of the training, one of the things about this model that excites me is that we have somebody whose job is to support those TAs. But under the old model, we had that reading specialist, we had 2 TAs, but all 3 of them had full intervention loads. So there's no time carved out in anybody's schedule to provide that training. And with this new system, we have somebody whose job it is to just support those TAs and make sure the system gets up and running. And if there are bumps in the road, we have somebody who is here to help smooth those out.
Thank you. Eric, did you have something further?
I actually just wanted to recognize Rebecca Butler. She's probably the most unknown person here this evening. She is our part-time interim principal over at the Cutler, and really has been driving this work. You know, I was at 2 of the elementary schools today, and we started, looking at things that were going on and talking to people, and it's obvious that there is a lot of alignment going on when you're talking to elementary teachers, and they're able to now have discussions about things like the Dibbles assessment, where Rebecca and her team and the coaches that we put into place are now taking the opportunity to make sure that everybody's on the same page, which I don't think has been as crisp in the past, and that's one of the things that is impressive, where we've taken that time to ramp this up so that everybody has a good idea of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and that certainly, points to that team, the work that team's done to just get all these pieces in place.
Thank you.
Could I say
Rebecca,
one more
Yep.
thing? Just along what Eric is saying, I've worked as a special education teacher in this district for 23 years. And so I feel really so good about the direction we're heading in, because we are really developing a comprehensive system to support all learners from pre-K to grade 5 in developing their reading skills. And so the MTSS work is really, I think we're going to have a nice continuum. We're really getting there. So it feels good from a special ed, regular ed point of view.
Thank you. And I was just going to say, my questions I am impressed with the committee. All of my questions got answered, and I see Jen has another one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so part of this MTSS was to develop assessments so that we can measure a baseline and moving forward make sure that this program is working, but I don't see that in these goals anywhere.
I think it was one of the action items.
Yeah.
I think it was an action. Assess and document.
Yeah, assess and
Yeah.
document the current state. Oh, that was the state of.
Right, that's curriculum and resources,
Yeah.
but not,
Yeah.
An assessment would be a resource.
Eric, do they have the detailed document, the grid document?
The blue document, because it's in there.
Okay.
No, they have this.
Okay. Yes, there's a more nuanced version of this with who's responsible, for each step. And the assessment is 100% a piece of that.
I just want to make sure it's not
Yes.
getting lost.
It's
Yes,
all linked
yes.
to assessment.
And making sure that we have the same assessment across all grade levels so that we can really track those kids from year to year. We're using the Dibbles 8, which is a nationally normed assessment.
Thank you.
Dana, I have
Anna?
I can't read that one. The first one I could read, I can't read that one. I guess kind of related to Jen, I understand that this is a new model and it's, October 7th, so it's not like we've really had a lot of time to determine it. It sounds like what you're describing, it sounds like it feels better to teachers. Would you think that that's an accurate statement? The model makes them feel more supported?
Yes, I'm going to say that we're 5 weeks in. One of the things that is tricky right now is that it still feels like we're still in a pandemic. And I think we wanted to come back in September and feel like things were back to normal, and they're not. And there's this, and we've talked about it at leadership, but there's this sense of, I don't know if panic is the right word, but we're still in that like go, go, go mode and not being able to slow down. So we do have more folks that are able to support teachers right now with those assessments. It's been great to be able to have the coaches and the TAs to be able to go into classrooms and in some cases give those assessments, but in a lot of cases support the classrooms so the teacher can come out and give those assessments. So that's been a really supportive piece, that when those assessments are given, there's the data sheets that come out of them, but there's so much more you can learn if you're the one sitting with the kid, actually listening to them talk. And so trying to create structures where teachers have the time to do that in the beginning of the year. And that's tricky because the kids in the beginning of the year are not, they don't have that independence yet. And so making sure there are other bodies to be in the classroom so teachers can really spend that time with those individual kids for those assessments.
Okay, thank you for that. So the reason I frame my first part of the question that way is I like the fact that it sounds like it's feeling better, but it seems like that's going to be quite some time before we know whether or not this is actually working, right? So if we're just developing the assessments now, presumably we'll get a set of data.
Yep.
And then when will we reassess the kids to see, because I guess the gut of my question is, when will we know that this new intervention model actually is helping kids learn and read better? I feel like that is like a year away or more. Like, when do we actually know if this is actually working?
It's not a year away. So there are a couple things. So the big assessments that are given to everybody are done 3 times a year. So we do that in September, early October. We do it again January and February, and then again at the end of the year. For those students that are identified as being at risk, those students who are not where we want them to be, that are working with the interventionists that Rebecca's training, they are continuing assessing. We're doing 6 to 8 week cycles.
6 weeks for difference, yeah.
So every 6 weeks they're being progress monitored to see where they are, to double check to make sure that intervention is doing what we want it to do. Do we continue on with the path that we're on, or do we make adjustments if they're not making the progress that we're looking for?
So at some point at a later school committee meeting, will we get some sort of update about, X percentage of kids were at this level, and now 6 to 8 weeks later, this percentage is here, not there? Like, it sounds conceptually like everyone's very happy with it, but much like Dr. Carr, I would love to see it actually track out in real time with students, because just feeling better isn't really what we're going for. But I appreciate the teachers feel better. Like, I'm happy about that. But.
It'll be easier to give that update in February after we do those mid-year assessments.
Okay, that was my question. Like, when will we know?
Data on everybody.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that we're not developing new assessments. We are using the DIBBLs. And so the rollout has been having the teachers do the DIBBLs rather than the literacy staff that had done it. At least it went through. The literacy staff had done it in the past. So the assessments were already created, and we're just in the assessment stage right now.
And these assessments will be school-wide,
There's
Yes.
K to 5 district.
all the students. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like this.
Okay.
Mr. Craig Hovey, Miles River Middle School principal.
All right, good evening. So at the middle school, much like we've talked about, I think you're going to hear this throughout all the presentations, is we've really tried hard to align the school-based goals with the district goals. We spent quite a bit of time in the spring getting the district goals into decent shape. And what we did at the middle school is we tried to break them out a little bit into more manageable sized chunks. So you'll see the first 3 goals relate to the district goal number 2, which is the multi-tiered system of supports. We broke them down so they were a little easier to understand and follow. So our first goal is to reinforce and refine our universal strategies for accessing classroom instruction and the 6 through 8 grade level. So prior to COVID, we at the 6 through 12 level in departments had worked with Landmark School on adopting and coming to some shared agreements on some high value strategies and techniques to help all of our students, not just our language-based students, which was where Landmark's expertise is. And out of that, we came to 4 specific inclusive practices, including the use of word walls, really emphasizing and defining the purpose of the instruction or defining the why, using 2-column notes, and giving time cues for where people are in the lesson. So defining the midpoint, letting kids know when there is only X amount of time left in the lesson or in a certain activity. We were seeing some good progress with that before the pandemic, and then, much like everything else, it got paused, and we didn't want to lose that because it was such valuable work. So one of our goals here was to reintroduce and recommit to those agreed upon inclusive practices. This was also really important because over the last year and a half, we've had quite a few new staff join us, and we wanted to build that. They do look a little bit different by department, but that's why, and grade level, which is why we had those sort of agreements that made the most sense. We're going to be monitoring, and so we've met with each department and sort of reviewed those. Our curriculum leaders took the lead on that. We've been meeting as an administrative team at the middle and high school weekly with the curriculum leaders to check in on these goals and make sure that they've got the support they need. And our sort of next stage is we're in the process of developing a monitoring tool that's going to be shared amongst curriculum leaders as well as administrators to really get a sense of where the progress is and who needs support in implementing these processes. So that's sort of the next process, and we'll be tying that in with our evaluation supervision cycle, sort of starting in November and moving through May to build up that consistency. Eric. The second goal is to complete an audit and action plan for updating our middle school curriculum documents. So a few years ago, we really started down the journey of documenting all of our curriculum in a UBD, or Understanding by Design, template and format. The high school work sort of got an accelerated push because of the NEASC timeline. Our middle school documents are in process and in various stages. So some departments are looking to be about 100% done. Some we have new units or new programs that are requiring additional work. So by October 15th, which was our district goal, we're going to have an audit of those curriculum documents saying this is where we are, and we'll be working on them throughout the year, as well as putting together some action steps for those that need additional time in the summer or beyond. Curriculum documents are never done. It's like changing the oil on your car. You get a certain distance, and then you got to make sure you change the oil, otherwise they're going to break down. So this will be ongoing work, ad infinitum. I don't know if my Latin's very good, but you know what I mean. Next slide, please. And goal 3 is really taking a look at our MTSS supports and systems at the school, the multi-tiered systems of supports, and assessing our needs for grades 6 through 8. So we've done a little bit of work in our professional development time, taking a look at some of the things that we have in place, our IST, or Instructional Support Team process, the district curriculum accommodation plan, the DCAP, sort of revisiting here are some of the things that are in place. We're going to be starting the work with George and Judy. And Eric, can you refresh my memory on the organization they're from?
MTSS Innovations.
Okay, MTSS Innovations, thank you. They've been doing a lot of work with the elementary school. We're in the process of meeting with them and really formulating a plan to work with middle school staff in the next coming months. So looking at what do we have for our tier 1, 2, and 3 supports. Ben mentioned that we have pockets of excellence. We have some great stuff going on at the middle school, but we want to make sure that it's system-wide. Evaluating our current instructional support team process and how can we improve that. That's where we take a look at students who are struggling academically, behaviorally, emotionally, and pull the team together to identify what supports they might need and how we can implement those. And then we are also in the process of completing our year 3 of PBIS implementation, or positive behavior interventional supports. What the organization, New England PBIS, that we've worked with has sort of paused everything last year as well and has given us an additional year this year to work with them. We're noticing that as students are coming back into the school, many of our 7th graders didn't have the same transition that we typically have. 6th graders are new to the building and haven't necessarily been in a school building for a while. So, overall kids are being wonderful, but we just want to revisit and reinvigorate those common expectations across the board, particularly in the non-structured classroom setting, so hallways, lunch, recess, et cetera. Next slide. All right, goal number 4 is to identify a high-quality, sustainable design for world language and instruction. I narrowed the range a little bit for us here at the middle school, just to 6 through 8. This is more of a district-wide discussion and conversation, but my main focus is here. So one of the things that shifted with Eric's move up to superintendent, this is something he was going to lead, is Brian Menegoni and I are now co-chairing this advisory council, which we're very excited about. And we put out a call to families for people who may be interested in joining us. We were looking for a nice balance of families at the middle and high school and who have had experiences with both language. And we wanted also to get some voices from the elementary level from families. We also have teachers in both Mandarin and Spanish at the middle school and high school level, as well as Kevin Sano, our current curriculum leader, and a few high school students are joining us. So we have our first meeting next week to discuss our action steps and what we're going to do to get some findings and recommendations to you by November 30th so that we can tie that into the budget process. Some of the things that we will be doing is looking at sort of the history of our world language program. I know you've heard some things about that in the past, as well as what are other districts doing and where have they found successes, and surveying families, students, and staff for their, what are they looking for in the district. So we hope to collect an enormous amount of data and process it and provide you with some findings. And one more slide. And then our 5th goal is sort of intentionally vague here. I didn't have many details when these goals were written. Our sort of partnership with Equity Partners developed during this process. But largely, we're going to work as a school in concert with the district work on programming reviews through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I know the district DEI committee has been established. We are going to be having a sort of joint meeting with the district leadership team and the DEI committee. I want to say that's coming up pretty soon in the next week or so that we're all on the same page with that. We are also going to tie in our work with the district professional development committee to make sure that we are providing adequate time and space for the professional development that might need to be done. Some of that may get fleshed out a little bit more as that process unfolds. So we'll be working in concert, and our sort of next steps will be identified by what is found in that audit and that professional development process. So
Thank you.
I'll pause and take any questions or thoughts that you might have.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Anna?
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. It was really good, helpful overview. I have 2 questions about the World Language Council and the sort of the DEI committee. And the DEI committee is this is more of a district goal, but I've heard from a few parents that really wanted to be part of those groups that were not selected because the space was limited. I'd shared with Superintendent Tracy that that was sort of a little bit disappointing because I think people had the expectation that anyone who wanted to participate would be able to participate. So I just wanted to make sure that you and everyone who is really working actively on this were aware that there's a little bit of a negative feeling of people who wanted to contribute that were not allowed, and I think there should be some sensitivity there. So I guess my question is, when you're looking at that world language redesign, this is sort of a question and a request, is there some awareness that we could do something radically different that comes out of that process? Because I know that we've sort of, we have the historical legacy, which is helpful. We have examples from other districts, but is part of that process going to be a real sort of table clearing moment of saying, what do we want to do as a district with language? And is that on the radar, or is it still sort of within the confines of historically we've done this and this is the usual way? I'm just curious to know what the mentality is of that language council moving forward.
So part of that process is we're going to be reaching out to all of our stakeholders and getting that information. I did get an email from a parent who wanted to, express that they would like to have been on the committee. I think we're probably at 15 or 16 people on that group already. So in the interest of moving in a timely manner, we tried to keep the numbers fairly low, or around 16. What I expressed to that parent, and I'll certainly express to any other parents, is if after you've gotten our survey there is more that you want to share, send me an email, and we can incorporate that into your findings, or I'm happy to have a phone call as well.
Okay.
So as far as table clearing, we haven't quite hit that stage yet. So we haven't had any conversations with the group. Brian and I are in the planning process on that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yep,
Jen?
Are middle school students part of this DEI group? Because it seems like that's when a lot of this, at least with my daughter, that's when she started talking about differences in gender and pronouns, was in middle school. And I hope those kids have some input into this process.
We don't have a formal middle school presence on any, I'm not on the actual district DEI committee. I don't know if there are high school students on there. I don't know if anybody can add that. There are.
The DEI committee, yes.
Okay. What I would imagine is part of this process, and what may come out of the audit, and I'm just guessing and speculating here, is having some local, school-based organizations where students and staff will have a particular voice in the process. So that may be a next step on this, is how do we form maybe a locally based committee. I want to see the process unfold before we go too far down that path.
Thank you.
Other questions? I had a quick question.
Sure.
Could you just say a little bit more about the, I think it was the behavioral, the PBIS, it was the behavioral, so you said it was year 3, and I understood it got put on hold. I didn't know a lot about that, so if you could just.
So several years ago, we were having some behavioral challenges at the middle school, and one of the things that we were noticing we needed to work on was consistency. Consistency in expectations and sort of how do we educate students on what are we looking for? How do we provide modeling? How do we sort of show them what we want them to do, rather than just telling them that they're not doing it right. So we worked with our staff. We created a school-based PBIS group that received quite a bit of training. We set some common expectations and values for the school. The staff have done a pretty good job of keeping, or actually a really good job of keeping that consistent. We need to reinvigorate that piece because, again, with COVID, it all fell apart, and expectations and behaviors all changed when you've got masks on, or half the kids are in the school, or we're not in school at all. So we're going to be working on just sort of revisiting and solidifying that. We have Liz Lovell and one of our teachers, Chrissy DeLima, are co-chairing that group and have really done a nice job spearheading that.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Menegoni. high school interim principal. I did what he did the other day in a meeting. He called himself the assistant principal. I almost just did it again.
Yeah,
So,
nice
sorry,
touch.
Brian.
It's all right. So good evening, everyone. And I'm here to present our school improvement goals for the 2021-22 school year. And they will mirror what you've heard a little bit from Craig at the middle school, but we do have some high school specific goals as well. The first goal that we have is by the end of the year, we would like to design a multi-tiered system of support for the high school level, and it's going to look a little bit different with the older kids, certainly, but the basics are still the same in terms of offering Tier 1, 2, and 3 supports. The action steps that we're taking, we have already reintroduced our inclusive practices that Craig spoke about. They're the same practices between the middle and high school because we did that as a 6-12 endeavor a few years ago. At the same time that we have been reintroducing these inclusive practices in the classroom, we're continuing the audit of our curriculum to make sure the documents are complete. And this will link to a couple of other goals. And I included this in there because one of the most important parts of MTSS is Tier 1 and having a well-articulated curriculum that identifies the supports that are available to all students. So we feel in order to build a robust MTSS structure, you want to have a strong foundation. And that starts with the curriculum and knowing the roadmap for where the kids are going to go and how you are going to help all students get there. We're going to begin in about another month or so monitoring the use of inclusive practices so we can collect data and see how those Tier 1 supports are being used throughout all of our different classrooms. So we are going to begin, first of all, the development of an instrument that allows us to go into classes and just see how often these different practices are being put to use. I would say probably by the middle of second quarter through the end of, or to the middle of third quarter or so. So you're looking about mid-December to probably early March or so. Really completing an audit of all the support structures that we have available to students in the high school. We have quite a wide array, but what we would really like to do is curate those, organize them, and then we can start to sort some of those into the different tiers of support. And finally, by the end of the year, complete the design of the MTSS structure. And I heard a question before, and I thought it was a great one. How do we introduce data into this? How do we know where kids need to go? How can they move from one tier to the next? Because you don't want a kid sitting in a Tier 2 support all year long, because then it's probably not working. So I think that's where the consultants are going to come in and really help us with that. Designing data structures for high school can be very challenging because kids have 6 or 7 different classes, and we have young adults who a lot of times can sort of be resistant to that support. So I think we're going to lean on the consultant quite a bit to help us with how to track that data, because like I said, kids with 7 different classes, different teachers, that can be one of the biggest challenges, I think, at the high school level in terms of MTSS. Okay. This is a high school specific thing, and schedule. This happens about every 5 or 6 years in high schools. This is my 12th year. I've seen 2 different schedules, so we're due for maybe a revisit of the block schedule that we use during the school day. So we've already established a committee who is going to look at this. We have 2 high school teachers. One of them is in the audience. Mr. Beckwith is in the back. He and Cecilia Pernice. Mr. Beckwith is a math teacher. Cecilia Pernice is a science teacher. They're leading the committee, which is made of other teachers, curriculum leaders, students. I don't know if we have parents on it, Mr. Beckwith. Yeah, we have a parent there. Just to get a lot of stakeholder feedback in terms of what the high school block schedule actually looks like. And the way these processes usually go is you just collect lots of information from all over the place. What are different high school schedules that you could use? What are our needs specifically from a curriculum standpoint? Also, looking back, what I just talked about with the MTSS, because one of the things that MTSS says is that if you want to help kids, you really need to do it during the school day. So the high school schedule that we develop needs to be done with that in mind. Any of the support structures that we want to offer really should be around between 7:40 and 2:20. You also need to pay close attention to the constraints of various bargaining agreements to make sure that whatever schedules are out there are going to work with that. The committee's job is to really put together 3 schedule possibilities that could be considered, gather feedback on these possibilities from stakeholders, and then make a recommendation. And the timeline for this really needs to be done by March, because the block schedule actually does impact our overall scheduling process in terms of what classes kids will choose and what they'll actually get into. And ultimately, as somebody who's made the schedule for a number of years now, my most important driver, I think, is can we get the kids the classes that will best prepare them for their future, for what they've identified for themselves. So it's complicated, but like I said, this is work that's done probably every 5 or 6 years in just about every high school, and also with the MTSS goal. I think it's an important task to take on. Goal 3, this is increased staff knowledge about DEI and its impact upon the experiences of our students. And I want to highlight that last part of the statement, because I think that's one of the most important things to recognize, is that as we work with our students, understanding background and experience of our students is really important in terms of how we establish relationships and what experiences we're going to offer them and how we can move them towards their future. And this is coming right out of the district goal. And I did not provide a lot of specifics there because I'm excited to see what the audit is able to teach us, what directions it can have us look in, and suggesting future action. Really throughout the year, at least once a month, faculty and staff will be participating in DEI-specific trainings, and ultimately at the end of the year, we're going to ask our high school faculty to reflect upon what is it that they've learned about this, both through perhaps working with the audit when the audit comes out, what the audit says, but just in our experiences together on the monthly trainings. What value have they taken in through this DEI work? The nice thing about, I think, the high school level is that we have student groups who are able to help drive a lot of this work and contribute meaningfully to it. So that's an exciting part of this work. And because we are a high school, our friends at NEASC will be coming back again this year. And this is another one of our goals. So we do need to complete the requirements for the spring visit that will be happening. The biggest thing that we need to attend to is our curriculum. That was the top priority area of the visit that took place in 2019. And the nice thing about this is it ties in very tightly with the MTSS work that we have to do. NEASC identified this as an area in 2019. We're engaging in the important MTSS work in 2021. So it's good to know that there's real meaning behind what NEASC asked us to do. It's not just to get it done, but it's so that we can provide a very enriching experience and supportive experience for all of our students. We also need to develop an action plan for completing the documentation of the curriculum, because when you do the audit, you're going to find that there are some areas that need to be filled in. So the next step is going to be an action plan, actually identifying how we're going to get to that end product. We're working right now with the curriculum leaders in terms of finalizing the audit, but also beginning that action plan based upon the data that we have retrieved out of the audit. And finally, there's some other requirements that were outlined in the NEASC report. Specifically, I can just talk about them quickly here. The vision of the graduate was one thing that they brought up, which is nice because we're engaging in that right now. Curriculum documentation was one. Social emotional learning, which is very important. Everyone has recognized the need for that. They in the last NEASC report called for us to connect students to adults, which we actually have already done through our advisory program. So we had that last year. I think it was very necessary last year, but certainly this year as we can continue those relationships that we already established. And the final priority area from NEASC was facilities, and that can be tied to some of the district work that we already have to do anyways. Okay. And this is of personal interest to me, I guess, but maybe to other people in the room as well. Increasing the proportion of students from Miles River who attend the high school. The last 2 years have been a wake-up call just because of the pandemic and some of the shifts that have occurred. Typically, there'll be about 12% of the kids from Miles River who will not attend the high school. The last 2 years, it's been double that. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the pandemic has had a significant impact upon that. But at the same time, I'm wondering, can we think more entrepreneurially about how we present ourselves, how we promote ourselves to the students and to the parents that are coming up? So what we've already done is to look at the withdrawal data over the last 5 years of kids who just have chosen not to come, interviewing some of the families who have chosen not to come, just to get an idea of what really drove their decisions. We are currently in the process of curating our transition information, and by that I mean what are all the things that we do at the high school to help 8th graders get ready for high school, but also to begin their 4-year journey with us. We have a 9th grade teaching team in place that meets regularly right now to talk about 9th grade students and how they're doing. Later in the year, we would like to connect that 9th grade team with our 8th grade students to start to build those relationships. Really cool thing that we have, our 9th graders have one guidance counselor, Matt Fitzgibbons. And so he gets to know all the freshmen. He actually leads this 9th grade team, but he has already also begun the process of meeting with 8th graders. So that bridge between 8th grade and 9th grade actually started at the beginning of the year, and I think that's going to be an important driver in terms of keeping some kids here. Sharing extracurricular opportunities with 8th graders, I think, is important because that does drive some kids to different places, what's available to them after 2:20. And then finally, at the end of this, just really tracking the data, see how this shakes out. Do our efforts pay off in terms of getting more kids to make the decision to come to the high school? Questions from anyone?
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Michelle Bailey?
I have a question about the schedule.
Yeah.
So how will you ensure that the new schedules provide equal access to the curriculum for all students?
So that's a good question. And I guess I might ask for a little elaboration, but in a minute. You know, one thing that we would have to make sure, in addition to meeting the stipulations of the bargaining agreements, is how does this work with students on IEPs? Does it allow them to get the services that they need? So that's one way I would answer that access question. Do you want to maybe expand upon your question a little bit in terms of access, I guess?
That was basically my question, because during the last schedule, it took a complaint to the state to get the high school to agree to make sure that all students had access to the curriculum.
So I think that learning out of that experience, just, you know, you have to make sure that students' IEP services don't impinge upon their ability to experience all of the offerings of the high school, you know, and any sorts of individual decisions need to be worked out with the family liaison and the student as well.
And then I had a different question on the last goal, and other than just satisfying curiosity, how would you determine that goal 5 was a priority, and how will gathering this information benefit our students?
In terms of what? I'm sorry.
How did you determine for goal 5
Yeah.
that it was sort of a priority?
Yeah.
And also, when we gather that information, how will it benefit our students?
The last goal about keeping students in the high school?
Yeah.
Okay. So just looking at, you know, a quarter of the students not coming to the high school. I think that if it just hit that threshold of like, wow, that's a lot, but also that was double what we would normally expect. And I just think the confluence of that made me wake up a little bit. And as you reflect too, it's like, what have we ever really done super proactively to help keep our kids here? I mean, private schools will have open houses at night at some point coming up to invite parents in. You know, your kids coming to high school, see what we have to offer. There's no reason why we can't do something like that. So I think that what's happened in the past 2 years related to the pandemic really kind of made me think a little bit about things like that.
Anna?
My question is about goal number 5 as well. I think it's fascinating that there's been that much of a jump, and I do think the pandemic has something to do with it, but it's amazing to hear us talking about the language of needing to promote or be entrepreneurial about our high school, because on first blush, those are not words that you would think we would have to market our high school, but clearly something there is a disconnect, not for everyone, but a significant number of students. So I'm actually really interested in some of these answers sooner than later, because I feel like it does tie to, you know, the budgetary goals and the facilities goals and the course curriculum goals. And if you get feedback from parents that, well, the facilities are falling apart and I want my kid to have a better athletic experience, well, that's a major thing. If it's that there are more in-person AP classes that somebody wants to take, I mean, those are all things that I feel like could really inform our budget process. But actually, this one is really worrisome to me because it affects enrollment, it affects funding, and it's strange to me to think that our high school would have to sort of try to, it reveals to me that perhaps we're not as competitive as we ought to be, given the amount of resource that we give to them. So I would be really interested to know when do you think you'll have some of that analysis done? I'd like to come back to this before budget season, I guess, is what I'm really saying.
So I guess maybe you're asking about that second arrow that's up there, maybe. Is that?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, and where they're going and why.
Yeah, I think that second arrow would be good to do. You know, that's probably a mid-October to mid-November thing, because when we're looking at, you know, perhaps having an open house type of thing, you know, that might be an early December type of move. So, you know, getting something, getting some answers, you know, mid-October to early mid-November to help inform what an open house would look like. I guess that in my mind right now, sitting up here at the podium, is kind of how I would answer that.
And we'll have the enrollment data. It was due on October 1st. I guess this is a Vinnie, Superintendent Tracy question, but will we get the enrollment report at the October 21st meeting?
No.
We have it on November 5th,
I believe we're going to get that on the November 4th meeting. I think that's when we have it.
Yeah, the data actually the data collection starts October 1, but goes all the way till, I think, October 23rd.
Okay.
Then they finalize the data.
Then we'll talk
put
about the
together,
data.
Yep, I think we have it on the November 5th
Okay.
meeting. November 3rd meeting, sorry. 3rd or 5th?
I think it's the 4th.
Oh, I got it surrounded. It's the first November meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for putting this one on. I think you're onto something, and I want to know what the answer is. So thank you for putting it there.
Welcome.
Okay. Julia?
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. On goal 3, under action steps, I think it's the only goal that doesn't have develop an action plan. So I think, I mean, it might be implied, but I think it should be spelled out that there will be some kind of some action plan that comes from the audit or comes from the committee recommendations.
Correct.
Just all the other goals had develop action plan.
Yeah.
So
I think I probably left that off. I'm really curious, like, what the audit's gonna, you know, what direction it will point us in and what steps we should take.
Can I speak to that as well?
Sure, Eric.
Thank you. So also keep in mind that there are 2 committees that will integrate as we go through this process. There's the DEI group, then there's also the Professional Development Committee. So they're meeting, I believe, next week to be able to pull kind of, okay, here's what we have to work with. Here are the offerings that are going to be available through the consultants. and then share it with them. So they're still a little vague because they haven't seen kind of the whole picture. And what our teams are hoping to do is lay out the whole year. So the Professional Development Committee met in the summer twice, and during those meetings, we just laid out a rough kind of, here's where DEI can fit in on our Wednesday trainings. They'll now refine that and pull some of that around and about it so it'll fit basically what the consultant and the DEI group have worked out. There's quite a bit coming our way.
Great.
Yeah. Jen, did you have a question?
Oh, I have a question.
No? Chris?
Oh, yeah, I have a question.
Make sure you lean into the mic.
Yeah. Being a three-sport athlete, I think we see a big trend with students not coming for sports facilities. I know this year there was only 2 freshmen who went on the football team this year, and usually we get about like 15 or 17. And I think students are going to schools who can offer more for the team. So I know budget is a big problem, and it's hard to get that funding, but I feel like if we get more funding, especially for these facilities and stuff like that, it'll introduce a lot of more students, I feel like.
Okay. Brian? I don't know if that relates, sounds like a little bit to
Correct,
the
yeah.
response that you had about it, interviewing families
Right,
about it,
so that's one
possibly
of the-
around facilities.
Correct. I mean, that looking at what drove the families to make their decisions, and that may be some of certainly what they highlight. I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise, but hearing it from people that we know, I think can really influence our future actions.
Great, thank you. Okay, do we have other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I guess I'll just add my...
Thank you. Thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And I just wanted to add, just an observation, I was really heartened to hear how many times this group used the word relationship and relationship building, especially after the year that we've had. That really seems essential, and it really was something I heard throughout everything you all said about building those strong relationships. It was encouraging. Thank you. Okay. I believe this is Vinny, our next, is that right? Oh, no,
No.
skipped. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I skipped right over. Sorry. Is it Brian? It's you again
Brian's
with the
coming back, yeah.
high school handbook.
Come on.
Set?
All set.
All right. So I'm just here to update the committee on the status of the high school student handbook. So you can go ahead, Mr. Tracy. And here's the timeline as I understand it. The high school council approved the student handbook for the current school year on August 12th. And then on August 19th, the student handbook was approved at the school committee level, pending some changes proposed by the school committee. We then met as a high school council on September 21st to consider the changes. And then the school council approved the changes as presented by the principal on September 21st. So that's just a timeline to give you an idea of how I understand the handbook to have moved to its current status. All right, and so the categories of changes. Now, as I reviewed the handbook and some of the comments that were made and places to look, I lumped them into 3 categories. I called it mechanical, I really couldn't come up with a better word, so I apologize for that. Language policy alignment, and then school level policies. So I'll first go through some of just the mechanical stuff as I understood it. And these seem to be some simple editing changes that could be made. So these are the things that I showed to the school council on September 21st. There was a portion in the handbook where it talked about graduation requirements, and some of the electives are described. Then it gets to a point where it just kind of says, okay, you need to take one of this or that, and really didn't describe what this or that was. And so it comes from the fine or applied arts or technology areas. So I just added that description in to the graduation requirements. Then there was another spot that deserves some attention in terms of plagiarism, to sharpening what that actually means. And you can see the definition up there, but really the addition has to do at the end there without proper citation, just to make sure that kids know that, yes, you are going to find things in different places, you're going to use sources, but you need to cite them appropriately. There was a redundancy in the bullying procedure as described on page 29 that I think was really just an editing issue. And after some of these changes are made and you refresh, just make sure the table of contents is in good working order. In other words, when you click on something, does it actually go to that place? So I checked it probably 50 times. And hopefully I don't have to do it 51. Okay, this is where I got, I slowed down a little bit, I think, because I'm just looking for language and policy alignment. In other words, the language that's in the handbook versus the policies that we have as a school district, and making sure that they align the way that we want them to. Is the language in the handbook correct? Or even, is the language in the policy exactly where we want it? The non-discrimination statement in the body of the handbook as it reads, came from, I believe, a DESE review a few years ago. It was provided by some attorneys who looked at it. And it starts with all students, regardless of race, color, sex, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or homelessness. And you see this throughout the body of the handbook as you're reading through the different sections. That phrase is embedded in the different parts of the handbook. But what I did notice is that statement doesn't always appear, or it didn't look like it shows up necessarily in our policies or in just different places in the handbook. So I'm just trying to figure out, really what should be there. Should we be looking right at the policy to determine what our non-discrimination statement is? Or is that non-discrimination statement that's there, is that more inclusive than what our policy is? So I think I'm looking to the committee for a little bit of guidance on that. So, we're not gonna read this together as a group. You guys read the policies as a school committee, but I put them in here if the public is going through this. Just in terms of the different non-discrimination policies as I could see them, especially with looks like the revamped identification of the policies beginning with A, whereas AC appears to be our district non-discrimination statement. But when I held that up against the one that I had showed previously that appears in the body of the handbook, policy AC does not appear to use the word gender, and the word homelessness does not appear in there as well. So I was just trying to figure that out, like how we want to handle that. Then I just put the rest of the non-discrimination policies in there for a matter of process here. So Mr. Tracy, if you want to keep scrolling up. ACA, I believe, was Title IX. ACAB talks about harassment, which has not all of the same classes that we would necessarily have identified in policy AC or in the non-discrimination statement. Then finally, policy ACE just has to do with the Americans with Disabilities Act, so it's more specific, I guess. You can keep going up, Mr. Tracy, so I can maybe illustrate this. For example, in Appendix B, which isn't necessarily a district policy, but it may be a district practice, it talks about how to handle discrimination and harassment complaints. And it mentions race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or age. But when you look at our harassment policy, it names race, sex, gender identity, creed, color, national origin, sexual orientation, religion, marital status, or disability. So I just found a discrepancy there, and I didn't know if that's something that we needed to handle here. But also in Appendix E, which I believe has to do with pregnant students, it talks about the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District does not discriminate against students by reason of their sex. However, the non-discrimination policy notes race, color, sex, gender identity, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, pregnancy, or pregnancy related condition. So again, I didn't know if we should be moving some of the language around to just make sure it's really consistent. And I didn't know if the committee wanted to adopt like the most inclusive possible non-discrimination statement, and that's what we do. So that way we see it all throughout the handbook, and it can really be used interchangeably in as many different situations as possible, because I just feel like it's hard for anybody to like make sure these things line up all over the place. I mean, we understand the spirit of it, but if we're looking for detail and strong alignment, it may be work that still needs to happen here a little bit, even at the committee level, school committee level. Okay, so that's the policy part. School level stuff here, graduation attire. You know, the way the handbook reads, it talks about, you know, having some sort of a vote, student input on this. You know, maybe a suggestion was made that perhaps we don't do that because it could certainly lead to some uncomfortable situations for students. You know, my recommendation is that we just keep student input as an important part of this, recognizing that they are young adults. They're the ones that have to wear the graduation attire for a couple of different ceremonies. But I understand the spirit of it, I guess, and we definitely have moved past the handbook language of boys will wear blue and girls will wear white. That's not anything that we should even be considering. You know, and I did meet with the senior class officers today, and some of this is a timing issue. We did our class elections this week, so finally we have our student leadership structure finalized for the year. So we have our senior class officers. They are the individuals who are going to be doing a lot of work this year, making sure graduation gets off the ground. So now that they are in place, we can work on some of this kind of stuff. You know, I put forth my feeling is that, you know, we're one team, we're one family, we're one group. We need to consider that as we walk across the stage and what we look like. That's my own personal feeling. You know, the students haven't weighed in on it yet, but I just let them know what my thoughts were on that. Drug and alcohol consequences. I know that there was some discussion about perhaps removing suspension or expulsion as a possibility, at least on the first offense. In reviewing the handbooks for all of the Cape Ann League schools, suspension and/or expulsion was always a possible consequence. And my feeling and what I recommended to school council is that we keep the current language in place as enumerated in law and in our handbook, but with the important point that the principal or deciding administrator exercise discretion, because we are dealing with young adults who do make sometimes not best decisions in the world. And we need to be measured in terms of what actually happened, the age of the student, how many times something has happened. But I have worked in enough different places to know that every once in a while something really does cross the line, and you do need to draw that at some point. You know, and but at the same time, you know, I still want to bring it back to the fact that I think that we've always handled this type of stuff pretty delicately, provided families with support, and really worked with both the kids and the adults in a manner that shows that, yeah, you made a mistake, but you're still one of ours, and you know, we're going to help you get back into school once you've been able to work with your parents and kind of figure things out on your end a little bit. So future work, you know, and I want to point this out because, you know, it's October, and, you know, we're talking about a handbook that we're already may have to look at tomorrow if something crazy happens. We want to make sure that we have our student handbook really in place for the very start of the school year. So how should this look? I would like to begin by eliciting faculty and student input through our various leadership structures in the high school. We have student government, we have class officers, we also have a building leadership team, which is composed of teachers, teaching assistants, administrative office staff, who can provide feedback on the handbook, any changes that may need to be made. So then we can kick it to the school council in the spring, like we're supposed to, I guess, as it calls for in the law. That way, we can bring it to the committee in a timely manner so that it can be approved before we leave for the summer, because one thing that would be nice to do in the summer is formatting the handbook and just making it look like a more finished product. And that's a great summertime project. You can sit on the beach and do that. You can sit in your backyard and do that kind of work. But the real substance of it really has to start in the winter time. And because high schools really get busy and things go crazy after April vacation, we want to make sure we have most of that stuff wrapped up before then. So that's where we're at with the handbook right now.
Okay. Do we want to pull up the second exhibit there? Okay, questions? I think we'll have the exhibit up, but go ahead, Julia.
Is there a reason we can't just have the discrimination policy written once and then just cite it the rest of the time? Just say, as written in the discrimination policy.
So
something.
that AC policy that was up there?
Yeah, I mean, if it's just written once and then cited
Yeah.
as per the district's discrimination and harassment policy.
Yeah. So the point I was raising, I guess, is that
It's just,
when I looked at the wording of the non-discrimination statement, I won't call it the policy, the statement, it uses the words, I think maybe if it's gender and then homelessness or additions. I don't think we have that in our non-discrimination policy per se. So I don't know if that's an addition that you would like to make.
So, Eric.
Hopefully I can clarify this.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting road. We've been going back and forth and kind of digging into this, and we are, actually we have the good fortune of being under review by the state right now. And part of that is that tiered system. They look at all of the things related to civil rights and discrimination and things like that. They took a look at the policy that, the language that Brian initially had put up and said, here's what we are recommending. We add homelessness. We've always added homelessness in our district, and that was fine with the Department of Education. So that's the most recent uptake. Procedurally, this body will need to go back and update our policies that were just recently approved, I think last May, and change that language. I think Anisidza came up with, one of the policies is totally different than any language we have. So what I asked Brian to do was look for all of the times that this occurs throughout the entire handbook, change what is not directly related to school committee policy, And now we're asking that this body comes back and just reviews and updates those policies, and then we'll do the same with the updated handbook. And that way everybody's on the same page. Procedurally, I think everybody will be comfortable with that. And I feel a lot more comfortable that we happened to be able to, a week and a half ago, get the support of DESI to say, here's the statement and it's okay to add homelessness.
Yeah, well, go ahead, Anna. Are you going to respond to that on the with
Yeah,
your
no,
policy hat?
I wanted to say a couple things. The first one is I feel seen and validated because I've been banging on that particular drum for the last 2 years, saying like these protected classes are all over the place. So it's nice to actually have somebody else have gone into the madness a little bit and say, yes, they are all over the place. I think what Superintendent Tracy is talking about does make sense. I think the only issue, and I think Michelle can probably help answer some of this too, the A batch of policies that were officially adopted in May, I think actually were last looked at in the policy subcommittee. It must have been 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Because when I started on policy, we were at I. So I'm not even sure when A was, would it have been like, how many years ago was A approved in form?
Probably when I wasn't on it.
It was a couple years ago.
So, what was that, 3 years ago? Probably about 3 years ago.
Okay. So I think then what you're proposing does.
It's taken a long time.
Yeah.
That process of reviewing the policies was supposed to take like a year or a year and a half, and it's taken a long time, so.
And we're not even actually done yet. So I think we do have policy subcommittee meeting coming up, and I think that what would make some sense is to sort of take what Principal Menegoni has sort of identified and look at those and try to find that. But I think if we do that, then we would have to go back and redo, AC, ACA, ACAB, like all of those policies. We'd have to swap out the protected classes for this new language and then reapprove them again, which I think some of it's just that this process, as Michelle was saying, I mean, it's taken however many years, and I'm not even sure that this was something that's being tracked as a problem. So I think we could add that to the policy subcommittee's agenda. How urgently do we need to sort of have that aligned? Would you want it aligned before next year's handbook is approved?
Can I?
Yep, go ahead.
I think that makes sense. I mean, given that the process is really pretty well laid out right now. It's really a replacement and then bring it back for the readings. So if we can do that over the next 8 months through the policy committee, I think if it pleases the committee, I can just make a recommendation based on the research that Brian's done. Say, these are the policies, here's the area to look at so that we can focus right in on that.
Okay, I could put that on the agenda for policy on the 25th. I do have a couple other questions for Brian, but I don't know if other people have questions about that issue.
Okay, I'm going to just, David, did you have a question? Nope. I'm going to let Jen ask a question, and then we'll come back. Hannah, go ahead, Jen.
So my question is about the drug and alcohol policy, because this is kind of a hot button for me.
Yeah.
Based on your policy in the student handbook, you have two tools to use.
Mhm.
You can suspend a student,
Correct.
or you can expel a student. You can't do anything else. So if somebody's dad left a case of beer in the back seat of somebody's car and the student didn't notice it, that student, the only thing you can do is suspend or expel them.
Yeah.
Even though it's not the student's fault the dad forgot the material in the back seat of the car.
Yeah.
I think the policy is written is A, not reflective of what actually happens, and B, doesn't give you enough options to react depending on the situation.
Yeah. I
Because
guess.
you basically have two.
Yeah, I guess I have a different reading of it. I read it as, first of all, I look at just about everything that's written in the handbook as a ceiling. This is as far as you can go. So that's how I read it. And there may be cases where an exclusion from school is appropriate. However, I believe the language does not say will be suspended anywhere. It did, years ago, used to read, will receive a 10-day out-of-school suspension, and that has been removed.
Well, it says after a hearing, a principal may, in his discretion, and that should be his or her discretion,
Right.
decide to suspend rather than expel a student. So those are your two options based on what's written.
I guess I read it and operate as may decide to, but the may decide to suspend could be different.
Can we change it then?
Yeah.
So it says may
Yeah,
instead of will?
yeah, and I'd have to look specifically at that and think about that, I guess, but.
I mean, I just would
yeah.
like the policy itself,
Yeah.
A, I think it's incredibly punitive as written,
Mhm.
but B, I think it should reflect what our students are actually going to experience if they screw up.
Yeah,
And I don't think, based on what we've talked about with Superintendent Tracy and what you've said, that students are either suspended or expelled. I think it's more nuanced than that, and I think the handbook should reflect that.
yeah, I would say to that, if a student is caught on campus with one of the identified substances, suspension generally is what happens. However, the duration of that suspension or the location of that suspension is where the discretion comes in. The other side of this, which may be something that, as I'm hearing you, that probably could be added in there, would be at least putting it in the language, because it is what happens in practice, is having the students come back into school through our Return to Learn program, the RISE program. The nice thing about that is that when students do come back from a suspension, there is a counselor and an academic advisor in the program who can obviously help with the social, emotional readjustment to school, but also help them manage the academic side of it. As an aside, you know, being suspended from school is a big deal. I think kids here want to be in school. They care about how they do. And ultimately, everyone finds out that that's what happened. I mean, just the way things work. But it's 2021. So before, you know, in 1990, if you were suspended from school, you probably weren't doing a lot at home. Now we tell kids, okay, if you are serving an out-of-school suspension, you can email your teachers, they can email you, you can email your counselor, they can email you. You have access to everything through Classroom. You just can't come on campus if you're serving an out-of-school suspension. An in-school suspension, just to sort of help everybody understand that, the kid is actually in the building, teachers will come down and meet with them, counselors will meet with them. So sometimes we will use that, you know, in combination, like you may need to spend a couple of days out of school, you and your family working together to get some things in order, you come back into school to serve the remainder of the suspension, and then the RISE program is also there to help you. So maybe was that something that you feel would be beneficial to add to that language perhaps?
I absolutely think that would be great.
Okay.
I think it would indicate that this is not like
Yeah.
smacked upside the head with a baseball
No.
bat because you made a mistake.
Yeah, right. So I think that's a point well taken.
Eric, did you have something to add?
Just want to clarify, there's a state legal requirement to include the language of the law, Chapter 71, 37H and 37H and a half, and that's pretty explicit about not only what occurs, but the process as well. It's a pretty detailed process. Like, you really can't eject a kid until you notify them of their right to a hearing, notify their parents of a right to a hearing. And that whole entire legal garb, if you will, all that language is required to be in student handbooks by state law. So you can see parts of it up here on the screen, and it does say may in two sections of that. I think you're more looking towards what's written about in the school procedure.
Yeah,
You know,
I'm
and
more
I think
looking.
that's the piece we can adjust. And
Yeah, I would just like the school procedure to reflect what's actually happening, not what, you know. Yeah.
There's also a secondary piece that integrates with this, the special ed portion of it, that really requires us to take an extra look at the student, special ed status, number of days they've been out of school. There's a whole separate process, manifestation determination that comes into play during this process. So suspensions aren't like they were maybe when most of us were in high school, where you were just out and forgotten. If you look at our record, we rarely suspend kids for long terms, and there's not a whole ton of suspensions racked up at the high school. It's more, there's been much more discretion, especially with the addition of the RISE program and that return to learn, and our school counselors are really good at connecting with families and kids during those times.
Yeah, I just think it would be great if the written policy reflected everything that both of you just said, because I think that's what's missing.
Anna?
Thank you. I have 3 questions. One of them is just a procedural sort of point of order. I'm trying to remember if we actually voted on this and approved it, or did we say, come back to us and we'll vote again, or did we take a vote when it was first presented? I don't actually remember which way we went.
We voted on it, Anna.
We did?
We
Okay.
did,
Okay.
so that we were able to start the year with a handbook in
Okay,
place.
I just wanted to clarify that. So
This is
I have
original.
2 sort of follow-up questions. One is similar to, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Eric put up the original motion there
Your motion amended
originally.
back in August.
So it's currently, the handbook is in place, and this is our opportunity for the secondary review.
And at the time we approved, the changes presented were just discussion of them?
No, you had some questions about periods.
Oh, yeah, there were some typographical things. So I guess, so I just want to clarify, all of the revisions that have now been made, or not made in some cases, are for the next round. This handbook is approved, it's in place. I just want to make sure, because we approved it with this sort of idea that we want to see changes, but those changes are not actually in the handbook officially. Is that right?
I had to go back and watch the video of this one because I wasn't sure myself. So I went back and we had an initial amendment to approve the handbook. You amended it with the language I just had up. And then this document, this exhibit here, outlines the requested changes or discussions that were requested of me at that time during that meeting. Brian took all of those back to the school council, and this outlines their agreement or disagreement, but basically this is the point where the handbook would be if we say we'll approve the handbook based on the changes that were presented tonight.
Okay.
The update will occur
Now.
So,
with this-
yeah. Start again.
Okay, so thank you for that procedural clarification. So I have 2 comments. One of them is sort of aligned with what Dr. Carr is saying. I would just say as a point of order, we should suspend the him, her, he, his, just say there. That way we cover all the bases. Like, I think that should just be general practice. I understand completely that there's a statutory requirement to have the language there, but I agree wholeheartedly. I don't like the way this reads because it almost reads as though starting with expulsion is the first point, and then after some discretion, you could choose to suspend. I had the exact same read that Dr. Carr did, which is those are the 2 options, with expulsion being the former, which seemed wrong to me. So I still feel like I understand we need to have the legal language, and I understand that could be framed as, per state law, all parents and students should understand that they may be subject to expulsion, blah, blah, blah. But I still don't like the fact that the first offense starts this way. There's still no mention of counseling. There's no mention of community service. I think it was actually Michelle at one point posted on social media, so credit to Michelle Bailey. I think it was the Manchester Code of Conduct has a whole bunch of language about counseling and therapy and other things. She can jump in there if she wants. So I still don't even like the way this reads. And if this were to be presented as is next year, this is still a no-go for me. So I just want you to be aware, I want to see an alignment with practice and policy. I think Dr. Carr is totally right that if you soften it, you need to put that in there. But I still think that our approach is wrong, and I understand that we need to have a heavy hammer in some cases, and legally we have to disclose that. But I don't like the approach here. I think it's way too harsh for first offenders, and I think there's no mention of holistic therapies, so.
Look, Anna, can I just jump in for a sec?
Sure.
Just to, So this may be one of the things where we just expand upon the follow-up in the handbook, is that counseling is part of the return from a suspension, both in terms of the student doing it outside of school, but also when they come back as well. I mean, so it's something that we do in practice, but maybe not in terms of how it's actually written in the handbook.
But could we offer counseling in lieu of suspension, not just as a transition measure?
Again, I would go back to my review of the Cape Ann League student handbooks. And
Right.
everything's started with some degree of suspension from school. And I wouldn't categorize that necessarily as an out-of-school suspension. It could be an in-school suspension. But, you know, if you're asking me as, you know, the administrator at the high school level, I think if a student brings drugs or alcohol to school, there's got to be a timeout here, and we say, whoa, what's going on? And that could occur at home. It depends upon the age and the severity and all that kind of stuff, but I just think that there needs to be a stop. And we look at, you know, what does this kid need, and what do we need to do moving forward? So that's my personal take on it. Just know that, you know, since Eric and I have worked together, that automatic 10-day exclusion from school has been removed, and that was literally how it was written as. That's a long time for a kid to be out of school for making a mistake.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll look forward to more language discussion on that. The other thing I did want to come back to is the graduation gown thing. I guess it just comes down to the fact that I disagree. I mean, I think that we have an obligation to ensure equity there, and we have an obligation to ensure that students don't feel singled out. And right now, there's no assurance in the language of the document that affirms students will not feel excluded in some way based on graduation. So I understand that students want to have a say, and maybe in some ways, in other ways, can express, you know, individual preferences. They know they decorate mortarboards and all kinds of things, but strictly speaking, I don't like the fact that we're still sort of rolling the dice on this and not mandating that we know that the students are going to be treated equitably there and will not fall in line along traditional stereotypical bias. So again, that's a place I would love to see us put that into writing, and I'm uncomfortable with the fact that we are not doing that. But I understand that I might be the one who disagrees, so that's okay.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up to that? My understanding, Brian, was that it would not be an option for the class to choose to say that they could not vote to say that boys would wear one color and girls would wear a different color. That's correct?
Correct, but I think Anna's point was that if a student chose a color, what you would normally expect, maybe
Correct.
they
No,
not take, all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what's that all about? Like, that's kind of I think,
Right.
what.
But in other words, there wouldn't be a gender choice that could be imposed upon the student.
Correct.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
So does anyone else have any questions before we? Not quite sure what we're looking to do. I do want us to remember as a school committee that this handbook is a little bit tricky because it really is the purview of the school council to do the work, and they have done a lot of work on this handbook, and that our responsibility is to make sure that it aligns properly with our policies. And, you know, so that's a little bit, I'm finding that it's a little bit of a complicated, to try to tease out where the purview is of each group.
Oh, I have one more question, actually.
Yes.
Is the handbook reviewed by the DEI in the audit? Will the consultant, is that part of it? I don't know.
So I would say yes.
Okay.
They'll go down a lot of avenues.
Yeah.
And I think that those policies and those ways that we get information to kids and families would be examined to see how those impact some of those equity issues that may or may not be identified. Some may come out of the handbook review, or some may come out of a policy review, or just a procedural review. So there's a lot of discussions across the way too with disciplinarians to say, okay, walk us through your process. So I think you'll see a lot of that get covered through through the entire equity audit.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm going to ask Brian, what are you looking for? Do we think we are looking for a vote this evening? And I'm asking, I guess, Brian and the committee, are we looking for a vote to approve these changes that are listed in the Exhibit 2, which is that, are we looking for that? Or because some people are looking like yes, and some people are looking puzzled. So,
Well, but that was why I asked the question. It sounded as though we already approved it. So would we be reapproving it?
So my understanding is we did already approve the handbook, but what I'm asking is if you look at Exhibit 2, which we had pulled up a second ago, which are the proposed changes for council, if you look at that, some of the changes are, my understanding, Brian, in your presentation, is some of these changes have been recommended to be made, but not actually implemented. So like the first one, for example, addition of the words fine/applied arts or technology, that hasn't actually been already put into the handbook, right?
We need, right. Yeah.
So we would need to,
We need to review, we just need to approve the updates. That was the request.
so, right, so the request for this evening would be, my understanding would be that we would be looking for a vote to approve the changes on this chart. Is that correct? Is that what we're looking for?
There's a version that was approved in August. These reflect some of the requests that were made by this group for change. In order to say, yes, those changes are agreeable, I think we need to re-vote so that we can replace the document with an updated document.
And that would be an updated document that would carry us just through the 2021-2022 school year, and then Brian has already outlined the process for the upcoming. Correct. Okay.
All right, so to be clear then, it would be adding the words in red, adding the red here. He's fixed the table of contents. We've standardized as much as humanly possible the protected classes with an acknowledgement that our own policies actually create conflict, but you've made the changes you can. And then there has been no change to the graduation bit. And then the only change to the drug and alcohol consequences was the removal of the sort of mandated 10-day suspension, but the rest of it sort of remained the same.
Yeah, well, the 10-day suspension, that's actually been out of there for kind of a long time. I was just alluding to that to show you how things have evolved over time.
Okay. And then you removed the bullying redundancy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So if what you're saying then is if we were to take a vote and approve that, those would be the changes we would be approving?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions about that? Okay. Do we have a motion? Oh. Jen?
Can I make a statement first?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm not going to vote for this with this drug and alcohol policy in place. I want to send it back.
Okay.
Is it possible to approve, to split apart the changes?
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying, does it have to be kit and caboodle? Could we do parts but not some? Or take separate votes on each item or something like that?
So I'm going to, is it okay for me to say?
Go ahead, Michelle.
That is not within our purview.
Right.
The school council is the one who decides what the disciplinary policy or procedures are in conjunction with, the staff that's appropriate. Our purview is only to decide if it aligns with our policies. So whether I agree with how they handle that or not is irrelevant because that's not part of my responsibility as a school committee member or my authority.
So then why do we have to approve it at all?
Thank you. That was sort of what I was alluding to,
It aligns
Michelle.
with policy. We do not have a discipline policy because that is an administrative decision.
So thank you, Michelle, because that is one of the things that I think is really complicated about this, and it's helpful to have you outline that, which is sort of what I was trying to get at, which is that our job is to specifically say whether does this align with the policies that we've approved. As we've just talked about, some of that is a little bit challenging because some of our policies have different wording.
Well, and we also, it sounds like we don't even have a drug and alcohol policy other than what is at the school by school level, correct?
I think there is a policy. There is another policy, but it's not something, so.
I don't think it's really, the question is, and I think this is what Michelle was just, it's not really that it's a drug and alcohol policy, it's really that it's a procedures for discipline. So it's a administrative decision about how that step-by-step process would go. I don't mean to, am I paraphrasing you correctly, Michelle?
Correct, and whether I agree with this or not is irrelevant to that process, so.
Okay, thank you. Anna?
So I think if what Michelle is saying is accurate, then I have two issues. Number one, that's never been how this is presented. It's been presented that we are approving the handbook. It does not, our charge was never, please go and compare the handbook to every stated policy, because if that was the case, then we as the committee would have gone through upwards of 90 different policies to look for alignment, and that was not what was ever asked of us. I mean, Jen raises a good point. No one ever said compare our drug and alcohol policy with what is here. I mean, that level of review is not what I feel like has ever been asked of us. It's certainly not something I've ever done. I mean, if I was supposed to be going through and read the handbook and read every single policy and look for alignment, and then my yes or no was, yes, we confirmed a policy, or no, we don't confirm, that does not seem at all like that's the matter on the table. So I mean.
So just to be clear, I think that that is my understanding of what our role here is, that the school council creates this document, and our role is to just say whether or not this document aligns with our policy, which is, that is our role in this.
Well, just as curiosity, has anyone on the committee actually done that? Has anyone of the six of us here read every single policy and compared it to every single piece? Maybe Michelle has.
Yes, I
think
have.
Michelle might be the only one who could credibly say yes. So if that's the criteria, then frankly, I mean, we should have abstained, except for maybe Michelle, because I couldn't credibly have said yes or no to Ireland, because that's not what was asked. I was asked to approve it or not, which to me is a totally different prompt than does it align with policy.
Okay.
So if you want my approval, I'm with Jen. My approval would be no, I don't like what this says, and I don't approve it. And technically, we now know for a point in fact, it absolutely does not align to policy. Mr. Meniconi has proven that. So, I mean, I think, I don't know. This is a frustrating conversation now because I don't like the policy. I don't like the handbook in the particular ways. I have no problem with adding, without proper citation, fine arts and apply. Like, I have no problem with that. But I do have an issue with these two other pieces, and I would be inclined to vote no on them. And then but we've already approved it, so I'm not sure what you want to do with those at this point.
Okay. David, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to say for 5 years now, I think I voted no on the school handbook, largely in regard to dress code policy.
Can you talk into the
This is the first year that we as a committee have really had an active voice and been heard in changes that we actually wanted to see in here, and it's been brought back to the school council. So, I mean, that's tremendous progress. It is not in our scope. But I think the administration, the council hears what we're saying and sees the direction that this board would like the district to move, and is making giant leaps in regards to trying to make that happen. That being said, no, this isn't a perfect document, but oh my God, is it so much better than what it was 6 years ago when I got in here. And I think we have to really act in good faith that we are in the right direction, and there is, yes, a ton of language that still needs to be updated, but it seems like we have a really good group of people that are hearing what we're saying and willing to, really go in and do their part on their end, as we now know that we have work to do on our end too, in regards to policy updating, excuse me, to align with this, and just realize that we're actually working in a partnership, and, unfortunately, everything can't happen overnight. So I just want to say that because it's been like a point of contention for me for years, and I couldn't be happier with the process this year.
Thank you. And I think this chart reflects that, right? These were the specific changes requested by or concerns, and this chart shows, and Brian's presentation shows the way that the school council considered and listened, and that, as we all know from being on this committee, sometimes being heard doesn't mean that they agreed with us. But they did consider all the recommendations that were, or concerns raised by this committee. To Anna's point, at this point, the school handbook is currently approved, so right now, we would be voting to whether or not to accept these proposed changes, I believe. Michelle, did you have something else you wanted to share?
No, it was just Chapter 71, 37H, Appendix B, says that the school council is in charge of reviewing the handbook. The school council shall review the student handbook each spring to consider changes in disciplinary policy to take effect in September of the following year. But it may consider policy changes at any time. So it's really the school council's responsibility to determine what disciplinary policies happen at the school. It's our responsibility to be sure it aligns with our policy. So if their policy was to whip the children, then we could say that does not align with our policy of how we, treat children. But otherwise, they have the discretion. Again, I have to say whether I agree or disagree with that policy or procedure is irrelevant in this vote.
Right, in a similar way that other procedures at school would also fall under that category. If there were other procedures that happened at a school, as long as they were in line with our policy, it wouldn't be in the purview of the school committee to say how, for example, how students line up for recess or,
But we're not asked to approve
Eric?
other things.
I think when you're looking at the perspectives over the years, the changing committee results in changing conversations across this document, as Dave alluded to. 8 years I've been going through it, and depending on who's sitting in the seats, depends on the response you get. I think this is a good open dialogue, and I truly believe we all get what this committee is asking for, and it makes sense. Okay, let's organize the way we are looking at our state law, aligned with our policy and our procedure. We're talking about procedure. When we're talking about disciplinary response, we're talking about procedure. And I think I would bet my check on it that Brian understands it just as well as we do, that the procedure is not clear how it happens. I think that's what Dr. Carr is saying, and I think it's important for us to continue to review that. And until we come here, we really don't know what the group is looking for. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of that back and forth, and I think, I hope we can appreciate that will continue along with this group and getting an understanding of how you feel, how we respond to it. I think the school council's done a nice job at going back and reviewing each. In fact, I think Brian did what I did and went back to the video and listened to it, everything exactly, and try to pull them all out and then bring them back. And as Dave said, I think that it's really been a different process than I've ever been involved in. Usually it's kind of come in, here's the changes, okay, go. So now we get some direction, and I think it's really good, because it hasn't happened like that in the past, and sometimes it's okay, we want to change this or adjust this, but this is good direction, I think, for this next iteration coming up, really in December, in a month and a half, 2 months down the road.
Okay. So in the interest of moving forward with our, not only with the evening, but just with the handbook, I guess I, would entertain us. We can either have a vote on whether to make these changes. I mean, it seems like that's the only thing that's on the table, is to make these changes at this moment. Regardless, though, whether we're not, my understanding is that at this point, we're not going to leave the high school without a handbook.
Well, they
Because
a
we have an
handbook
approved
Have a
handbook.
handbook.
So we're not gonna, right, so, so,
I agree. I think we are being listened to, and I like Dave's point that, you know, we're not gonna make every change that everybody wants the first time. I mean, and I agree, I understand what Michelle is saying, that we're not responsible for district procedure. I am looking forward to seeing the policy change, but it doesn't have to be now.
all right. Jen, would you be willing to make a motion?
I move that the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee approve the Hamilton-Wenham Regional High School Student Handbook for the 21-22 school year based on the changes presented.
Second.
Seconded by David Polito. All right, do we have any further discussion? Anna?
I think this conversation is fascinating because Michelle, and I applaud and recognize your years of service and experience. That's really valuable here. But there is a profound disagreement between what Michelle is saying, which is, it's not our place to talk about the procedure. It's not our place to tell the council what to do. It's not our place to talk about graduation. Not our place. All we're supposed to do is say this aligns with policy. That's what she is saying, and I can hear her and understand why that would be true. I'm profoundly then confused why then we are ever asked to approve it in this form. And to Superintendent Tracy's point and Mr. Menegoni, I love that we've had this conversation, and I love that we're feeling heard, and I think the idea that you can be heard but still not agreed with is valid. But if what Michelle is saying is true, none of that is relevant. There's no obligation for you to listen to us whatsoever. So I don't quite understand still what we're being asked to quote-unquote approve, because if you're asking for me to approve the substance of this handbook, it's a no, but I don't think that's even the question that's been presented to us. So there is a philosophical misalignment within the four people sitting at this table, where we're talking about listening to us and hearing us and making these changes, and David is right, there's been this great, lovely, but if our purview is truly limited in the way that Michelle says it is, none of that matters anyway. So to me, you're asking for my approval on something. Approval means that I agree with what's in it, that I like what's in it, I feel like it is the direction. The fact that it's supposed to be a policy alignment is something that has never been elucidated, has never been prompted. Other than the protected classes, I certainly have not read every single policy to say, yes, this conforms. Because I didn't understand that that was what we were supposed to do. Because when someone says approve, it means you're approving the substance of the book. So I feel like I have to make the point that two things are being said are true at the same time that are actually in direct conflict with each other.
David?
I just want to say, I challenge you to change your perspective on how you're viewing this, because you're right. We don't have say in what goes in that handbook. Yet, the people that do are hearing what you're saying and making those changes, right? So instead of saying that, looking at the negative light of, it's the point is moot for me doing this, to say, look at the fact that they're actually saying, all right, we hear what you're saying. We see these changes. We actually agree with these changes. We want to make these changes. And we're continuing we're saying that we're going to continue to work with you and make these changes together, right? That's progress, right? It doesn't matter sort of what it's been. This is where we are now, and it's in a wonderful place. And if you look at that and say, okay, well, this is how it's been, this is as a result of your voice personally, that this change is happening, and sort of take that as a moral victory. Is it are you at the mountaintop where you want to be on yet? No, and that's perfectly understandable. But at the same time, like I said, I've been here 5 years, 6 years, I've lost count. But, And the movement we've made this year is earth-shattering, right? And so, like, I'm definitely looking at it from a much different angle than you, because I've been muttering, some of these changes for years that just have, I don't want to say fallen on deaf ears, but have never gone anywhere. And this chart is tremendous. It's tremendous growth, and a tremendous improvement. And I, want to say that it's your voice largely that has helped move that. So take that for what it is. You don't need to be satisfied where you are, but you deserve to, be happy in that it is movement, right? Education doesn't move very quickly in any direction.
And I would add that when I came on the committee, the committee had a policy that said that the superintendent reviewed it for policy alignment. And it was David and I on the policy committee that was like, no, the law says that the school council goes through the discipline, but that all of it in combination is supposed to be under the alignment with our policies. So we should be approving it so that it aligns with our policies. That way the high school knows that, yes, in fact, the committee is aligned with their policies. So it's only really been in the last 3 or 4 years that the committee has even had any insight into this at all. So the fact that we're, as David said, that we're having dialogue and any sort of back and forth is actually amazing, and we should be happy about that. And just because I don't agree with this particular procedure doesn't mean that I'm going to vote down the whole thing, because in general, I agree with most of it.
Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to vote? Okay. Is everyone clear on what the motion is? Okay. All right. All those in favor? Those opposed? Okay. And it is 5 in favor, 1 opposed, and the motion passes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Menegoni. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. You're all welcome to stay, but I am noticing that it's late, and I so appreciate you all being here. And
thank you all.
please go get some sleep.
Thank you.
Next, Vinny is going to present the Student Activity Club information for us.
Thank you. I felt so bad for him scrunched over like that, trying to talk to him.
Yeah, you can stay. This might be useful in student activities. Yeah, well, student activities is relevant. Right. Okay. So beautiful.
Okay, tonight I'm here to update you on the student activity accounts as of June 30, 2021. Now, normally this would be presented to you as part of the treasurer's semi-annual report to the school committee. But as you know, with the turnover in the treasurer's position, I'm kind of stepping in for him momentarily because there's a need for an annual approval of the high school student subsidiary accounts. So one overarching theme that I noticed while reviewing the student activity accounts is that the COVID-19 pandemic either drastically reduced all the student activities or in some cases completely stopped them in their tracks entirely. So just to give you a brief overview before I do this, each of the schools have a student activities account, and within each of these accounts, they have a checking account and a savings account. So all the money that they take in gets deposited into the savings account. When the principal goes to write a check, they ask for a transfer from the treasurer, and he transfers the money from the savings account to the checking account, allowing them to draw the funds. So at the beginning of FY21, in overall, we started the year with a $114,000 balance within our student activities account. Throughout the year, our net activity increased by approximately $23,000, and we ended the year at roughly $137,000. One thing to point out is obviously the high school is the biggest contributor to the student activities account. They make up approximately 81% of the overall balance. In addition, every single school except the high school deposits all their money into one account, but at the high school, there is subsidiary accounts that break it down in even more detail. That is what we are gonna mostly go over tonight. So right here on this slide and the next slide, I've broken out every one of the subsidiary accounts. I've listed their beginning balances, all the revenues they took in during the year, and all the expenses they paid out, and ultimately their ending balances. There are over 37 active subsidiary accounts at the high school. Within this chart, I've also put an asterisk under each account that has not had activity since July 1st of 2019. Now we have our own internal policy that states if a student activities account does not have any activity over 2 fiscal years, that we will automatically close the account and distribute their funds amongst the remaining other activity accounts. But there is a little bit of problem with that, which is why I invited Brian to stay. This is the complete list of approximately 17 accounts that I listed previously that have not had activity since 2017. You can see that most of these are field trips, and at this time we're requesting that we maintain these accounts. Obviously, because of COVID-19, we haven't seen the activity, but nearly all of the accounts, all of these groups have either started activity this year or will start it before the year is over. So if we were to ultimately follow that policy and close these accounts tonight, we would take the funds away from these groups and give it to everyone else, and then come back to you in a few months from now to authorize you for us to reopen the account, but now they're gonna start the year without any funds. So tonight we're asking that you allow us to maintain these accounts and keep them open for at least one more year to see how this coming year pans out. If you do that, this list here will be the complete list of authorized accounts. I'd just like to point out, when I did copy and paste this over, I accidentally copied in the hidden accounts, so I have struck them out right now. I do apologize for that. But in total, when we are done, there will be 36 active accounts. The only account we are asking to close tonight is the class of 2018. For some reason, they have a residual balance of $7. But as another policy states, if the class, after the class graduates, if they do not collect their money within 2 years of graduation, it'll automatically be closed and dispersed to everyone else. So at this time, we're only asking for approximately $7 to be distributed amongst the rest of the grades. That really is the brief kind of brief overview of our student activity accounts. Again, there is an annual requirement that you approve the list of high school subsidiary accounts. That is the main reason of our presentation tonight. So I can kind of answer any questions. I know that was brief.
I thought we did, oops, sorry. I didn't mean to speak out of turn.
David.
Actually, I thought we did 5 years. I didn't realize that we shut everything down after 2 years.
Yeah.
So.
Anna?
Thank you for this. Only because I know that they exist and they're active, I'm curious to know why the Social Justice Club is not on the list of clubs to authorize.
If I had to take a guess, I would assume they have not taken in any money or dispersed money, but I'm not positive.
But I know that they got, I know the Ed Fund grant is separate, but are we saying that they're not using any club money in the same way that others are? I'm just curious to know why they're not on the list.
Looks like Eric might know
Is this
the
from
answer.
FY21?
This activity is from FY21.
Right, so was the social,
It was.
okay. Eric?
They did receive Ed Fund support, but that money stays at Vinnie's level. It doesn't go into the student activities account. And then they bought books as one of the things, so they would make their purchases. We would do it through the school, the district level accounts, and that's kind of the agreement we have with the Ed Fund. Because sometimes the accounts are $50,000, and we don't want to drop that into a student activities account. But that's really been the money they've received. They haven't done a car wash or any specific fundraising, and that's generally where the money comes from. The kids have, the food night out at Fuddruckers or a car wash or some type of other fundraiser. But they got a really sizable chunk. It was almost $5,000.
I think it was like 7,000 maybe.
Yeah, from the Ed Fund, and that money stays at the district level, and then they access it through a different process.
I'm just going to add a little bit to that from my Ed Fund days, is that it doesn't even actually stay at the district level. It actually, it's actually a reimbursement. So they actually never get the money. They actually purchase something, and and the school asks the Ed Fund, and the Ed Fund reimburses the school. So I believe, Vinnie, the Robotics Club had a similar thing,
all the Ed
where they
funds were,
didn't actually show up on I actually think I asked about it. The Robotics Club didn't show up right away as an authorized club because they had been funded in the same way by the Ed Fund, I believe.
Correct.
So I guess the question I then have is, the word authorization is strictly financial. We're not saying that a club not on this list doesn't exist or can't operate. You're simply saying they don't have a financial account.
Correct, but if in the future...
No. It says that they do not have the authority to fundraise, collect money, or expense money.
If we want them to in the future, we need to bring them to you and get your approval to open a new subsidiary account for them.
It's something you'll probably end up seeing come across in a couple months.
Yeah. I might be wrong, but I believe we had a very similar conversation about the Robotics Club.
We did.
Yeah, okay. Okay, are we ready for a motion? Okay, go ahead.
I move that the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee vote to approve the list of high school student activities subsidiary accounts as presented on the previous slide, titled, quote, "Authorization of Clubs," end quote.
Second.
Seconded by Anna Seizik. And is there any further discussion?
I have a question.
Michelle?
So if a club has a raffle of any kind, what is the process to ensure that they've gotten a raffle license?
Do you know that, Brian or Eric? I think it goes
Eric?
through the principal.
Eric, do you know?
So actually, there is a requirement to go to the town
Right.
and get authorization for any type of a raffle, because it's considered gambling at the town ordinance level. I can't remember the last one we did, but part of the process of requesting to do a raffle for fundraiser does entail saying, did you go to town hall, talk to this person, and get this and this? So we usually do that with the adult liaison of the group.
Okay.
Okay. We look like we're ready to vote. Okay, all those in favor? And that is 6 in favor, and the vote is unanimous, and the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up on the agenda is our, every meeting, we review the face coverings policy. Eric?
Face coverings.
Yep.
Just gonna do it.
Great, thank you.
On video. I think it's this one.
actual policy that's been approved that we're working under now. Notice the additions there. There has been a rise in cases in Hamilton, a drop on the Wenham side, and then across the schools we've had 2 cases at Butler, the 923 to 925, and 2 cases at Winthrop. Not all picked up in the pool testing. I want to make that clear. Some kids have been found out before they've come to school, so they don't reflect the same number as you see below in the pool testing. Okay? I just want to make sure people were aware of that. So we may find out from a parent that a child is COVID positive, but they didn't come to school and they weren't pool tested. They just happened to find out at home. We've had a few of those instances. So that's the difference in the pool testing versus the new cases. So that's really the change. The positive test rate has gone down by 1. Gone down by 1 to 24. Again, that's a longer cumulative average over time that doesn't exactly line up with the 7-day averages I learned from talking to Tate, but
That is true.
it's a representative metric that they use in the townwide charts. So.
Okay. Do you have questions? Anyone?
So I have a question. Can you
Michelle?
explain, so the extension of the mask mandate by the DESE had something about school committees requesting something or other. Can you explain what that was?
Go ahead.
So the commissioner recently extended the kind of mask off deadline, if you will, if you're vaccinated, from October 1 to October 15th. And the stipulation of that is you need to actually submit a request with the state to do that. If you intend to do that, you have a form, that give us a form that you fill out. It's signed by superintendent, school committee, and then I think a school committee rep, and then sent to the state, which they've promised 2-day turnarounds on these requirements. So you, even though you may say, yes, all right, October 1, the high school, because they've reached the vaccination rate,
At
doesn't need to
80%.
wear a mask, you still need that approval from the state for it to be 100% approved.
Okay.
So that was a stipulation they added. That was not part of the original October 1 deadline, but it is part of the October 15th deadline. There's no requirement to there's no automatic requirement. It's still left in the hands of the districts to decide on that. And what we're finding, there are multiple factors. The superintendent listservs are loaded with, what are you going to do if you have 7 through 12 or 6 through 12 all in one building, which a number of schools in our area do.
Right.
So that's been put asked back of the commissioner. We're waiting for a response to how to actually respond at the school level to that. So MASS, I think MASC was involved in those conversations about a week ago, and we're just kind of, they pushed back a little bit and said, here's what's coming out of, quote, reality. What do you think? So we're just waiting for some more guidance from the state.
So can I ask 2 more questions about that? So since you just brought it up, are we 1 building or 2?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is Hamilton Wenham's middle school and high school 1 building or 2? Because do they run off of the same air handler system? I don't know.
So the air, because the middle school is newer than the high school, they do not run on the same air handler. They don't run on the same water heaters. They have their separate utilities, if you will. I mean, electricity is probably shared, but the buildings are connected by shared spaces.
Yeah.
Please keep that in mind. We have a library that we share, middle school and high school. We have a gym that we do share in some ways, although there is much more separation in the gym than in the library.
So that could be of concern. And then my other question is, I'm just curious, and I do not expect for you to have this number now, but in the future, like what % of students are still pool testing? Because we really had a push to get a lot of students last year, and I wasn't sure if we still had the high rates of participation this year.
So I wouldn't put a number out there, but I know there's 122 pools that run between 8 and 10 people in a pool, but that also includes staff. So I could be in a pool with 9 kids, or
Right.
or myself and Brian could be in a pool with 8 kids. So it really depends on the pool makeup. And then there's always one pool that's kind of the last pool that might have 6 in it. So I would say it's a pretty low percentage, especially at the upper levels, because of the vaccination. I mean, there's a higher comfort level with vaccinated students. You know, I think most vaccinated students aren't lining up to be pool tested, honestly. So I think that's part of kind of what's at play here.
Yeah.
So we're missing the breakthrough cases then.
Well, yeah, the masking seems to be necessary because we don't have, I'm just saying, I don't want to, I'm not saying I won't vote to put that through, but I think before we do that, we're going to need to have some higher participation in pool testing, because you need mitigation strategies. So if this is your mitigation strategy, great. Otherwise, your mitigation strategy is pool testing, and so I'm a little uncomfortable with it.
Well, and I mean, if I may, at this point, you know, we have a policy in place and nothing changes. At this point, the state has not said anything that would make that change without our consideration and our vote. So, you know, that would need to be something that we would be able to debate and discuss. So, Eric?
I would ask one thing, to make whatever metrics you determine clear.
Yes,
You know, I think
I
it's
agree.
important to give people the opportunity to make the move. If they, you know, okay, here's, you know, I'll use Lexington. Lexington was up front. If the high school
Yes,
gets
they
to
were.
here with their vaccination rate and this much pool testing, then we'll move here. And I think that's appropriate for us to do it in this district as well. I think it's important to be transparent in that expectation of, and I think it'll motivate some people to move in that direction.
We also might want to include a hard number for percent positivity. So if it goes above X, you start wearing a mask again.
Yeah.
Well, and I would love feedback from the administration, because, you know, unvaccinated students are still going to have to wear masks, and how difficult is that going to be for you to administer? I mean, there's a lot, and I think that it was set up that as soon as we reached a certain level, that boom, it was all going to be over. And I think we need to just set the expectation that it's not boom, it's all going to be over as soon as we hit the percentage of vaccination. And we appreciate everybody who's been vaccinated, because that's kind of makes things easier. But.
And to your initial question, Michelle, would you have to consider that at our 2 or 1 connected buildings have 6th graders who are, for the most part, not eligible to be vaccinated at this point? So
Right.
it's a factor. Okay, I think it's really good that we keep having this discussion at each meeting, because it'll give us the opportunity to make those decisions. Julia, did you have something?
Oh, no, I did ask.
Jen?
I know this is more of a topic for a future meeting, but it does fit in with this topic.
Sure.
Like literally the day after we met, the CDC said booster shots now for teachers, first responders, nurses, healthcare. We have to address that at some point in time, don't we? Whether we're going to require boosters or not?
I mean, I think if it's a topic for a future meeting, we can write it down and we can have it as a discussion at a future meeting.
I just didn't know if it was something we needed to talk about, or if Eric is just going to make the decision. I'm fine either way. I just wanted to know.
Eric?
So the memo I sent out last Friday to all the staff, I outlined your decision of the previous meeting, outlined kind of how it works, what the expectations are, what the exemptions are, and the language in that memo for all staff is fully vaccinated.
Huh.
And I think that covers us in that case. If there's a booster, it may be worth a discussion to say, you know, are you fully vaccinated if you were on Moderna and you have your 2 shots? Or are you fully vaccinated if you go to have the booster as well? I think that's a worthy conversation. I do think it'll be definitely a community conversation. So I think it's important, especially with the teachers group. I've been working with them and the Ask Me group to try to nail all this down.
Okay. I'm writing it down as a future discussion because I think it's important. Okay. Okay, are we ready? Do we have any other questions on that, or are we ready to have Eric move on? I know he's got other updates for us. Go ahead, Eric.
Happens when you have 75 tabs open. So some of the pieces and parts of this report are just to let you know. I just wanted you to know that recently have sent out an opportunity for parents to join the district parent council. 5 or 6 people that have jumped in right away, so we're leaving it out there a little bit longer to try to, we'd like to get 3, maybe 4 people at each of the levels. But really I'm not holding anybody back, and there are so many opportunities in the district to get involved. I think people are starting to see that they can be on, the Portrait of the Graduate Committee, they can be on the DEI committee, they can be, so we're trying to keep those opportunities available. Also next week I begin 3 different public meetings, 2 in person, 1 in Hamilton, just at the high school, middle school complex, 1 in Wenham at the Bucher, and then 1 on Zoom, so that if parents want to connect with me, talk with me, chat with me, it's just kind of be an open meeting where I'll start it out and say, here are the things that we're doing, kind of like what I'll do tonight, and then just open it up. I'll be spending an hour at each one, just kind of connecting with people, and I think that adds to that kind of increased communication that I set as a goal initially. We do have a blog up and running. We do have an Instagram up and running. We do have a Twitter specific to me up and running. Hopefully you follow, and certainly we're always looking for more followers, right? Aren't we? More likes. But those have been pretty good. The kids are generally on Instagram. Adults will be on their email and Twitter sometimes, and I think we're hitting all the avenues with the weekly and then all of these different social media outlets. So that's been really good. And then looking at all of the committees, all of the kind of goal-oriented committees, the Portrait of the Graduate group had their first meeting last night. It was great. We had over 50 people with us at the high school library. Mike Nicholson from Battelle came in and did a great job kind of running us through some of the changes, what the landscape changes are for kids, and what that means to the future of their job opportunities. We talked a lot about, jobs that are here today that won't be here tomorrow, and jobs that, don't exist will suddenly appear 10 or 12 years from now as our kids get out in the world. And so we've taken the first steps. It's been great. We had community members, we had parents, students, teachers, administrators, really good, robust conversations, and some great outside. Some of the community people that we talked to after, and we got some feedback forms, they were really excited to be involved in this process. It's going to be a necessary evil for us as we move forward because of the work we need to do in the next probably 5 to 8 years. This will be a good foundation, so we're on our way. The DEI, as you know, the applicants have been selected. It's been rounded down to 12 members, which last meeting Stacy Busick outlined how that was done. And there are 3 high school students, 3 students, 1 high school, 1 middle, and 1 elementary staff member, 1 high school, 1 middle, and 2 elementary parents, and then 2 more community members. And then the leadership team, which is Stacy's group of 4, we'll be meeting with equity partners to really lay out, as I explained earlier, along with the PDC, lay out the process for the rest of the year. One of the things that we've learned in our conversations with Regis of Equity Journey Partners, is that she said, I can do your equity audit in your timeline, but I don't think it's enough time for us to do it well. So we've spread that out a little bit to be able to give them more time to do it well. And that's a risk I took before coming back, just to say I think it's important to give that time to do it well. And she felt like it made better sense in our kind of in what we're looking for and trying to, the data gathering. And so that's one change that occurred over the goal. So the goal is a little bit different just because we've spread now that equity audit piece. So it's gone from like, I think we had a month window, we've really spread it out to 2 months to buy some more opportunity for the kind of learning and gathering aspect. MTSS, literacy stuff is still cruising. I was able to spend time in 3 schools today, 2 elementaries and the high school, and you know, we were talking about Dibbles earlier, and watching teachers and TAs interact with kids while teachers are taking kids and going through these assessments, as we explained earlier, one at a time, one kid at a time, really gathering this data and really personalizing those opportunities for gathering data. The data intervention specialist is working with the coaches. They're observing model lessons and kind of getting to know their students as they kind of build this program. All the teachers at the elementary level did training on administering Dibbles 8, and that was a kind of an eye-opener for us when we learned that some teachers really weren't comfortable. We just kind of assumed that they knew how to do it. So we turned around, Jen Clifford, along with Rebecca, and the coaches did the Dibbles 8 training, and that assessment window began last Friday on October 1st. So that's already started. I was able to observe that at the 2 elementary schools I was at. All the instructional coaching training is completed. The 4 administrators have been part of that, the building principals and the kind of the coach connection. And then the 3 instructional coaches are relying on the essential guide for student-centered coaching to continue to start that process of working with our teachers. So it's really coming together, and the ramp up has been smooth, but also, again, eye-opening, where we made some assumptions initially, and we were able to clean up some things along the way to give some comfort level to some of the teachers who weren't as comfortable. Secondary, as we learned, they have reviewing the inclusive practices. You heard it mentioned a couple times that this next window coming up, November through March, is really when they'll observe it, if you will. This year, the curriculum leaders are evaluators. This is new for us, so now we've got 7 new evaluators out there. Part of the evaluation process, we've asked the curriculum leaders and the administrators to specifically look for instances of the inclusive practices in the classroom. So we've gone kind of down to the fine grain. They're also working with teachers. They did initial training on the district curriculum accommodation plan, which is complex, you know, but it's a tier 1 support that a lot of teachers don't generally turn around and go to seek out. So we're trying to give them the opportunities, the understanding before we build this MTSS structure up. We want to have them look at what's available at that first tier. That includes instructional practices. Strong instructional practices and equitable instructional practices are certainly on the line as well as we go through this evaluation process, and then in conjunction with the curriculum work that they're doing at the secondary level with the curriculum maps and the curriculum audit, and then the action plan. Today I was able to meet with Kristen Borges, who's the curriculum leader for social studies, and she's been working with the administration at middle and high school and the curriculum leaders on this unique little document that allows them to look at a curriculum map for a unit or a set of units and identify specific things that we want to see in there. You know, what are kids going to know? What are they going to understand? And this document allows the curriculum leader to review them the same. So if you're a math curriculum leader or a social studies, you're looking at these documents and looking for the same kind of standouts, if you will. And then it pushes you into a number of directions based on the completeness or incompleteness of the map, or based on the quality of what you've written in this map. So a teacher will, this summer, write a unit in biology. That unit will come back to the science curriculum leader. The science curriculum leader now has this kind of running tab of going through and checking off, okay, it has this, it doesn't have this, essential question's not quite there. And that puts them into either kind of the red zone, is like this one needs some more work, or the green zone, where we just continue to grow this document, which is what happens in good curriculum work. Teachers will continuously go back to them through the year and say, this is what I wrote about in this lesson, it didn't work. I need to change it, or this is what I wrote about and it worked really well, and then also share it. So there's a lot of good things at the curriculum level, going on, and while I was gabbing, my computer went to sleep, so excuse me for 1 second. You remember your password under pressure is right? So the World Language Study Group has been kicked off. Their first meeting's October 12th. 15 people on that committee. Again, our committee requests are really high. And I have to say thank you to people in the community for really jumping in and saying, I want to be part of this. It's hard to have a committee of 50 and do it well. So we kind of set that limit right around 12 to 15 to get it started. But I want people to know, from the school perspective, people will still be able to be involved. There's going to be opportunities for surveys and focus groups and things all along the way through the school year. So please don't get down if you weren't selected for a committee, but we really do intend to get feedback from everybody in the school community, especially our parents, to be able to kind of make better decisions that impact everybody. In the learning facilities, most of you, I think all of you know that we have been put on the short lists from the MSBA for the Cutler School Project. We have a couple of meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks. The first one will be a Zoom meeting with the MSBA, some of the school people. We'll need a school committee person, and then there's a second meeting that will be on the 20th that will be an in-person walkthrough of all 3 elementary schools. This is important that we show interest. That is a key factor for the MSBA. They really want to know if you are really interested in this project. And it couldn't have been underscored anymore in the meeting that Tom and I had with the representative from MSBA. She really said, we want to know and get the feeling that the community wants to do this, and that, in that case, we've invited the town administrator, the town managers, because I think that's an important conversation down the road. It does impact both communities in some way, shape, or form, and it'll really drive our decision of what we want this project to look like if we get selected to move forward. We currently haven't been selected, but we're on the short list. There were 58 original projects. We're on the shorter list of 20 now. And they'll review us through this process. After about 10 or 12 weeks, when they go through all 20 projects, they'll come back to us and say, we don't think you're ready, and these are some things you can do, or you're now in the accepted list, and then we move forward. So it's exciting. It's exciting news, and I think that's one of the bigger things on the facilities front.
I was going to, just as a matter of business, I do want to make sure we choose one of us to be on that. Yep. So can I just interrupt and do that quickly?
Dana, can I ask a question?
Oh, sure. Anna has a question.
So when you say for the Cutler School project, meaning only the Cutler facility or all 3 schools together?
So
all 3 elementary schools together, sorry.
The SOIs went in, Cutler School, Winthrop School, those were the focus points. We actually convinced them to go through the Bucher as well. I have to give Tom credit on that. Tom went back to them and said, listen, this is going to impact 2 towns, 3 schools. Can you at least walk through with us and give us a better idea? I really need to personally clarify the why we're doing this. And I don't know if that's really clear, and I want to make sure, because there are options, okay, do we build 1 school? Do we combine 2 schools? Do we combine 3 schools? If you combine 3 schools, you have a regional agreement issue. So there's some bigger conversations we'll need to have.
You don't have a regional agreement issue if the school is in Wenham.
Yeah.
But when you say,
you say
the Cutler School, you're really meaning the elementary schools.
Correct.
It's not as though the only proposal on the table is only to do something with Cutler specifically.
Correct.
So I think just as a point of terminology, as we're talking about it, I feel like we should talk about the elementary schools. Because when you said that at first, I thought, well, what about the other 2?
Well,
so
it was submitted as a Cutler project.
It was submitted as the Cutler School project. And if you go back to the original submission, it was just the Cutler School.
Right.
And as this submission went in, I think 3, maybe 4 times, it expanded into Cutler, Winthrop, and then what will happen, the MSBA will have the meeting with us, they'll walk through, they'll try and get an idea of the vision that we have, and they'll also give us some guidance to say, here's what we think makes sense, because they'd be initially funding it. So the process is still long. We got a long way to go.
But this is the moment of these towns this is the moment where we get to talk about what we're going to do about our elementary schools.
Yeah.
All three of them,
Yep.
not just Cutler. Okay.
Yep. And there's no decision
That's part
made.
of the process as well.
Yeah. There's no decision made, like, oh, we're actually just doing this. MSBA will help point us in that direction. That's part of their role in these meetings and these walkthroughs, and then we'll go from there. It's a long process still, but
Yes, it
I'm
is.
hoping we can get into the accepted list.
And what was the date of the meeting that they're coming? October 20th?
So, yeah, so there's 2 meetings. Make sure.
October 15th is
yep,
the first one.
which is a Zoom meeting at 9 o'clock.
And then the second one is October 20th at 9:30 a.m. We will start at the Cutler School.
And I sort of calculated that out. I think realistically, it might go till noon, maybe, depending on 3 schools, travel time.
They've given us a very tight window.
Okay.
They were very specific and underscored it several times. We do not. They want to spend most of their time in Cutler because that's the base project. Winthrop, they were like, Cutler, Winthrop, 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll give you 15 minutes for Bucher. That was a kind of an add-on,
Okay.
so we'll take all the whatever we can get.
Take them to the basement on a wet day.
So I'm sorry to step in on but I do, again, I just want to just jump in and see. I guess my question in a sort of a casual way is who, if anyone, is interested and available on at those days and times? If you are, jump in.
I'm definitely interested. I'd make myself available.
What time on the 15th? Oh, you said the 15th was
It's
a Zoom.
9 a.m. for a Zoom call on the 15th, and then 9:30 at Cutler on the 20th for the walkthrough.
I'm super interested, but only available on the 15th.
Okay.
But I could be on the Zoom
Okay.
call on the 15th.
Yeah, well, David, it sounds, are you saying you're interested and available?
I'd make myself available, yes. I was involved in the first walkthrough. So
Okay.
I really would like to stay.
Because I mean, if you, I don't know if other people are interested. I mean, I think I said in my email, I am available, but I'm certainly open to someone else doing it. So if you raising your hand, David? Okay, anybody else? Okay.
I could do it if it was after 12, but I can't do it at 9 a.m.
So I don't know if we need an official vote or if we could just say thank you to David.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. And please know I am certainly available for emergency backup. You got that?
Excuse me.
Great.
Okay.
I'll send the link to Dave.
Great, and again, I can be there if in an emergency.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry, keep going.
I'm going to move right on to the request that Dr. Carr made last meeting, the impact of vacant positions. I did put a memo together and wanted to put this right out here, but see if I can get on to back on AirPlay here. So this information is still accurate. It's been extremely difficult to hire, to the point where when you look at positions like the high school kitchen manager, our director is stationed in the high school kitchen serving food, our high school principal is serving food, our high school assistant principal is serving food. Because we only have really one person assigned to the high school. We had a second person who's given their notice, unfortunately, because of the disparity between pay versus paying for insurance. It was kind of a shock. I don't think they understood that when they took the position, so we're down to one, so there's a number of hands on deck there. You can see the open food service workers, so there's really a number of food service worker positions open across the district. It's been a really tough position to hire. And if you go down to teaching assistant. We're still trying to put a teaching assistant in the middle school for cover special education. Right now, we're actually backfilling with teachers. There's a clause in the contract that if they work an extra period outside of their 5, we pay them a percentage of their salary. So we're doing that now to make sure that that is covered, because it would be an IEP coverage issue. Point 6, Title I at the Winthrop, we're still missing support, but covering with other people, kind of same way across the district. TLCs in the Cutler School, we've been able to bring 1 in. We still need 1.8 more, which is actually 2 bodies, 1 full-time position and 1 part-time position. This is our highest level of concern. We were able to get 1 person in the position because Carolyn Shadiak actually had somebody to hire for her school, but we had all met the week before and said, if you have somebody, please send them to Cutler, and the person was amenable to going to Cutler, so we were able to pick up 1 of them. And the teachers, again, are covering these spots, and it's that's a program that needs the personnel in it. It's not one we want to kind of let go, because there are definitely compliance issues within that program. Lunchtime monitor at the Bucher School. It's kind of a lower level, not higher on our priority, but it is an open position. We're using TAs to cover those opportunities during the day. We have an IT tech. They're just advertising that position now. They could not realistically do interviews at the beginning of the school year, given the massive workload they took on, and they're still going. They're still pumping iPads into the 7th grade, and they are 100 miles an hour. So we finally got that in motion. That will be advertised early next week. The SLP, speech language position, is currently being contracted out. That is one where we don't even have an applicant, even though it's been advertised for quite a while. That's a specialty position and hard to cover, but we cannot ignore those services, those IEP services, so we're contracting out, which is going to get expensive, but right now that's the way we have to cover it, to cover ourselves for the services in speech and language. We have an EL tutor position open. I think it was previous meeting. We have had a pretty good increase in the number of Ls in our district. A number of kids who are both younger and have less language acquisition or language knowledge, if you will, English language knowledge. So that's been a complexity where, in a kindergarten class, when you have 22 kids and 1 or 2 in the same group that have limited language capacity, it's difficult. So we're trying to get, that's another priority position for us. And then an HR person at the district level, it's just, again, Vinny is doing the work of 3 people in his office, and really, I'll say it publicly, I commend him for keeping up with the tidal wave. It has been nonstop since June in his office with HR and the budget stuff, and it just has not ended. We hired well over 70 staff people this year, and every one of those goes through quite a long process. So this will be a bonus for Vinny to help out, but we'll get that advertised in the next week or so, and then that person will have to come in and get trained and kind of get into place. So we're actually trying to determine the best place, because we have two holes, if you will, that are related to either payroll or HR. So we have to kind of figure out how that all connects together. So those are the positions that are either open and advertised or soon to be advertised. It's tough. Everybody I talk to, every superintendent is struggling. We were joking with each other. We're like, okay, if you enact this policy, then they'll quit and come to me. And like, it's a kind of a running joke about how we get people at each of our schools. It's across every district I've talked to, every principal, every superintendent. Even today, I had a class for the superintendent's induction program, and that was a piece of the conversation where the bigger towns are missing 30 people. They're missing larger numbers. So we are trying. We continue to bump up our ads on School Spring. We keep rotating them through, and we bump them up. They kind of reset, and people get to see them again, and they go out on Indeed. So we have coverage. It's just there's no one applying for positions.
Are there other non-school specific job boards maybe you are posting those in place? Do we need to cast a wider net outside of the industry specific places?
So I talked to an individual that does recruiting, not education specific, but they're even having difficulty connecting the dots for people. So it's not just our industry, it's really everywhere. And you can see it when restaurants are all looking for help.
Yeah.
Everybody's looking for help.
Cumberland Farms closes at 2 o'clock.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
I
right.
did not know that. Yeah, so it's not just the education industry, it's really everywhere right now, unfortunately. I even heard the ski slopes may not fully open because of it.
I heard
so.
that too.
Thank you. I really appreciate this. It gives me a much better idea of what we're dealing with.
Julia?
Just in good news, I want to say that just thank the IT people because my daughter got her iPad and it was flawlessly set up and we've had no problems. So, so thank you to the IT people if you're watching, and also thank you. We've been having a great experience. So that's some positive.
I'm glad.
Some positive news.
It's important to know that people are stretching for us. We are very lucky. People are stepping up to do some things that they could say, not my problem. And we're not seeing that. It's all about kids for everybody. And I think that's important to note that across the district, every level, people are doing multiple jobs.
Right.
They really are doing, and people are stepping out. I watched an elementary teacher take a student who was off that period, take a student from a kindergarten class who was having a difficult day and take that student with them to just calm them down. And instead of, that was their prep period, but no, they're working with kids trying to help out their colleagues. So it's been fascinating, but also a little bit unnerving because we do want to fill these positions and get people in place.
Thank you. David. Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle.
Oh,
No, it was me.
Was the HR position one that we had budgeted for?
Which one?
The HR position was that one that we had
budgeted
budgeted.
as a payroll / HR. We really didn't. It's in there, but it might be defined as payroll. Right now, we have 2 holes, both payroll and HR. We're kind of doing an analysis now. We think our weaker area is HR.
Okay.
So is HR. That's why we're put the HR one on the slide.
And I'm not going to say it. I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm not going to say it because you knew what I was going to say, and I'm not going to say it.
Are we good? Okay.
One more.
Okay, one more.
I just hope everybody got an opportunity to take a look at this last memo. For 2 years, due to COVID, we have not, well, actually last year, we did not present our professional status golden apples to staff members because we were out at the time we were going to do it. We were remote. By the time we got back in, it was just kind of like, okay, let's wait and get it done when we do it. So the list on this memo are the people on the left, people obtained professional status in 2020, and the people on the right obtained professional status in 2021. And professional status, for those who don't know, is when a teacher spends 3 years in the district and then successfully completes 3 years, and on the first day of their 4th year, they're eligible for professional status. There are ways to not award that. We haven't had any of those issues, so we've been lucky. We have some really strong teachers, and this list is representative of that excellence across our district. So at the faculty meetings this past Wednesday, the golden apples for 2 years were presented in front of peers, which I think is important. It's an important milestone for our teachers that are newer to the district, and it's good to share with our current staff members. So that's our list.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, congratulations to all of those that have achieved that. And it's really wonderful to have such a nice long list of people that have achieved that. Okay. So it is, was there any, I'm sorry, was there anything else, Eric? No? Okay. So it is 10:05, and we have really made it an effort to be finished by 10. And so I'm looking at the rest, and if anyone feels like there's something on there that they need to have addressed, please say it now. Otherwise, I'm going to be willing to take a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn at 10:05.
Is there a second? Second by Julia Campbell. All in favor? And the motion passes unanimously, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.